Welcome, welcome. You're here at Arcane Paradox. Today we present to you, Wednesday Addams detected 14 death curses on Harry first day and Addams family declared war. Like and subscribe if you want more awesome stories. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Chapter 1, The Taxonomy of Curses. The Hogwarts Express didn't know what to do with Wednesday Addams. This wasn't unusual. Most things didn't know what to do with Wednesday Addams. Trains, however, had the additional disadvantage of being enclosed metal tubes hurtling through the countryside at speed, which meant that the other students sharing compartment 7 had approximately 4 hours to decide whether the pale girl in the corner was reading a book about embalming techniques for pleasure or professional development. The answer, for the record, was both. She'd boarded at King's Cross with a single black trunk, a small cage containing something that made periodic sounds like a throat being cleared by someone who'd swallowed broken glass, and the expression of a person conducting a field study on a species they found mildly underwhelming. The cage sat on the overhead rack. The book sat in her lap. Wednesday sat in the window seat and watched the English countryside dissolve from suburban grey into something older and wilder, and she catalogued what she saw with the same methodical attention she gave everything. England was wetter than she'd expected. The darkness here was different, softer, greener, more apologetic about itself. She found this annoying. The compartment had emptied by crew. She didn't look up from her book when the last boy grabbed his chocolate frog and left, but she noted the sound of his retreating footsteps and filed it under predictable. The letter from Nevermore had been her mother's idea, technically, though Wednesday had agreed to it with uncharacteristic speed. A year at Hogwarts. An exchange program. The language of the official correspondence had been diplomatic and warm, full of phrases like cross-cultural enrichment and collaborative magical scholarship. Wednesday's mother had translated this accurately. There were things at Hogwarts that Nevermore didn't teach, and Morticia Addams believed her daughter should have access to everything. Even things that might kill her. Especially those. What the letter hadn't mentioned, because Morticia hadn't thought it relevant enough to put in writing, was that Wednesday had spent the 3 weeks before departure researching the school, its history, and the singular boy who lived inside it like a scar that wouldn't close. She'd read everything she could find about Harry Potter. The Wizarding Press. The Muggle-adjacent accounts. The gaps in the record, which were, she thought, more interesting than the record itself. A boy who survived a killing curse at 15 months. A boy who'd spent the following decade living in a cupboard. A boy who kept ending up at the center of events that should have ended him, surrounded by people who called this luck rather than something more deliberate and more troubling. Wednesday Addams didn't believe in luck. She believed in patterns. She arrived at Hogwarts in the first week of October, 3 days after the start of term on account of Nevermore's different academic calendar, and she stood at the entrance to the Great Hall at exactly 7:43 in the morning and took stock. The castle was better than she'd expected. Old and layered and genuinely strange, she could feel the magic in the walls the way you could feel a drop note vibrating in your back teeth, persistent and slightly uncomfortable. The ghosts were interesting. She made eye contact with the Bloody Baron as she crossed the entrance hall and held it until he looked away first, which took 11 seconds and appeared to unsettle him considerably. Professor McGonagall had collected her from the carriages and walked her to the hall with the brisk efficiency of someone who had done this many times and would have preferred not to be doing it now. She was, Wednesday thought, probably excellent in a crisis and absolute hell to argue with, which made her simultaneously more and less interesting than the other staff she'd observed so far. "You'll sit with Gryffindor for now," McGonagall said, holding the hall door open. The Sorting Hat, well. It said you presented a unique challenge. What did it decide? It asked if you'd consider being sorted into all 4 houses simultaneously. A pause. You apparently suggested it sort itself instead. I was being practical, Wednesday said. I don't have time to attend 4 common rooms. McGonagall made a sound that was not quite a laugh and opened the door wider. The Great Hall was loud. It was warm. It smelled overwhelmingly of bacon and something Wednesday identified after a moment as contentment, which she found almost as suspicious as any curse. For long tables, hundreds of students, the ceiling opened to an overcast autumn sky. She walked toward the Gryffindor table without looking at anyone, selected a seat near the middle, poured herself a glass of water, and opened the book she'd carried in her robe pocket. She was aware, without looking up, of the space that opened around her. Students shuffled sideways. Whispered. She noted the distance they maintained, 2 feet minimum, 3 on her left where a pair of red-haired boys had apparently agreed by silent consensus to leave a buffer zone of empty bench between themselves and her. "You're the Nevermore transfer," said one of the red-haired boys. She turned a page. Evidently. "I'm Fred." "That's George." "Or I'm George and that's Fred," said the other one, helpfully. "You're Fred," Wednesday said, without looking up. "You tap your left foot when you're thinking. George taps his right." Twins who mirror each other habitually are almost always presenting the same dominant hemisphere on opposite sides. You went first, which means you're slightly more likely to assert your identity when uncertain of how you'll be received. Fred is a more assertive name. Therefore, you're Fred. A beat of silence. "We've confused professors for 6 years, George said, sounding genuinely impressed. "Professors are trying to teach you." "I'm trying to read." She paused. "Also, Fred, your left shoe has a scorch mark that isn't from the others. You've been running the detonation tests solo. You should probably have a partner for those." "How did you?" Your eyebrows grew back unevenly. 3-week-old regrowth on the outer edges. Consistent with close-range heat flash. She looked up for the first time. Her eyes were the color of a winter lake, the kind that didn't freeze all the way through. "You're welcome." Fred and George looked at each other with the specific expression of people who have just met someone they intend to keep. She went back to her book. That was when Harry Potter sat down across from her. She knew it was him before she looked up, because she felt it, a sensation like standing too close to a transformer box, or pressing your hand to a wall and feeling the electrical current running through the building's bones. A low, constant hum of wrongness that didn't come from him so much as it clung to him, the way a smell clings to fabric. Old and multiple and layered. She looked up. He was smaller than she'd expected from the stories. Not physically, he was a reasonable height, though thinner than he should have been, but in the way he carried himself, hunched around something invisible, like a person who'd learned early to take up less space. He had round glasses with a hairline crack in the left lens that someone had repaired with spellotape. He had the kind of tired that lived in the eyes rather than on the face, the chronic kind, the kind that came from years rather than late nights. He also had 14 death curses active on his person, layered over him like geological strata, each one distinct in age and signature and intent, and the oldest one was almost 15 years old and sat on him like a second skin, a thing so deeply embedded in his magical core that it had stopped reading as external and started reading as him. Wednesday Addams had been raised in a house where dark magic was a household topic discussed with the same matter-of-fact familiarity as weather patterns and dinner plans. Her mother could identify a curse by the quality of air it displaced. Her father had once broken a binding hex over his morning coffee because it was interfering with his newspaper. She had grown up understanding darkness not as something alien and frightening but as a dialect she happened to be fluent in. She read the curses on Harry Potter the way a linguist reads a palimpsest, one layer at a time, oldest to newest, each one telling her something about who had placed it and when and with what intention. The oldest was the death curse itself, Voldemort's, rebounded and fragmented, a shard of it lodged in Harry's scar like a splinter in wood. She'd read about Horcruxes. She recognized what she was looking at, and she filed the implications carefully and without panic, because panic was inefficient. The second was a blood proximity curse, designed to flare when Harry was separated from his mother's family, intended to cause escalating misery. Not killing, just corroding. She identified the magical signature as institutional. Old. Something designed to keep rather than to harm, which made it, in some ways, worse. The third through seventh were what she classified as opportunistic curses, the kind placed by people taking advantage of an already weakened target, one from a cursed artifact, third year, she estimated, based on decay, one from a hex that had partially stuck and festered, fifth year, recent, one that smelled distinctly of Azkaban's dementors, not a curse exactly but a soul impression, a mark, like a scar left by cold. The eighth was deliberate and recent and she didn't like it. Someone currently active had placed it within the last 2 months. A tracking charm layered inside a monitoring curse layered inside something she needed more time to properly identify. 9 through 13 were older, amateur work, most of them faded to the point of near irrelevance, the magical equivalent of dead weight rather than active threat. Schoolyard hexes gone wrong, escalated beyond their original intent. Still, they interacted with the fresher curses in ways that compounded the damage, the way multiple small injuries made a body slower to heal a larger one. The 14th was the newest and the most elegant and the most unpleasant. It was an unraveling curse. The kind that didn't kill quickly. The kind designed to slowly, systematically, over years, erode the target's ability to form meaningful bonds, not through action but through subtle magical interference in the social-emotional centers of magical cognition. It made people keep distance without knowing why. It made connection harder without making it impossible, just difficult enough that isolation became a natural outcome. Chronic, patient, designed by someone who understood that a person with no one to fight for fought poorly. Wednesday closed her book. Harry Potter, who had been reaching for the toast rack, stopped. "You have 14 active death curses on you," she said conversationally. "The oldest one is a fragment of an Avada Kedavra that's been living in your scar for approximately 15 years. The newest one was placed within the last 2 months by someone who is currently at large and wants to monitor your location. The one I find most objectionable is the 14th, it's specifically designed to prevent you from keeping people close to you. I thought you should know about that one in particular because it explains some things that probably haven't made sense to you." She watched him process this. She gave him 3 seconds, which she considered generous. "Who are you?" he said. "Wednesday Addams. Nevermore exchange student. I arrived this morning." She picked up her fork. "You should eat. You're significantly underweight for your frame and your magical output must be enormous given the number of competing curses your body is compensating for." Harry stared at her. Around them, the noise of the great hall continued unabated, no one else had heard the exchange, the ambient sound providing cover for the most significant conversation Harry Potter would have that morning, possibly that year. "You're serious," he said. "I'm always serious." He looked at her for a moment longer, and she watched the calculation happen in his eyes, the instinct to dismiss, to call it a joke, to back away from information that would require something of him if he accepted it. She watched him override it. 14, he repeated. The number surprised me too. 7 would be significant. 14 indicates a sustained pattern of targeted magical assault over a period of 15 years. Your survival rate is statistically remarkable. She said this without admiration, just arithmetic. The fragment in your scar is the most structurally significant. It's not just a curse remnant, I believe it's a piece of a soul. Something changed in his face. Not surprise exactly, but recognition, the specific expression of someone hearing a thing that explains too much, that makes too many pieces suddenly fit. "A Horcrux," he said quietly. Wednesday raised an eyebrow. "Just the one. You already knew." "I suspected. No one would say it outright." He rubbed his forehead without seeming to realize he was doing it, fingers finding the scar automatically. "How are you? Why can you see all of them?" "My family has a particular relationship with darkness," she said. "We're not afraid of it. That makes it considerably easier to look at clearly." She took a bite of toast. "I should tell you that the 14th curse, the isolation one, was almost certainly placed by someone who knows you personally. The magical signature suggests proximity over time. Someone who's been in regular contact with you for at least the last 6 months." Harry went very still. "I'm not going to speculate on who," Wednesday said. "I don't have enough data yet. But I'm going to find out, and I thought you should know it's happening so that you can recalibrate your trust assessments accordingly. He looked at her as if she were a species he'd never encountered before, which was accurate. Why are you telling me this? He said. Because you're walking around with 14 curses on you and no one has told you. That's either an information failure or a deliberate suppression of information, and in either case it means you've been making decisions about your own safety without access to relevant data. She looked at him steadily. I find that intolerable. But you don't know me. I don't need to know you. I need the information to be corrected. A pause. Although I am interested in you, if it matters. Not many people survive what you've survived. I want to understand the mechanism. That's. He laughed, suddenly, a short surprised sound that seemed to startle him as much as her. That's the least comforting thing anyone's ever said to me, which is genuinely impressive because I've had some terrible bedside manner in my life. I'm not trying to comfort you. I'm trying to help you. Those are different things. He looked at her for a long moment. Yeah, he said. They really are. Hermione Granger arrived at the table 20 seconds later with a book under one arm and an expression of mild disapproval that shifted immediately to bright, assessing curiosity when she saw Wednesday. Ron Weasley arrived 30 seconds after that with 3 bread rolls and the expression of a man who had learned to treat mornings as adversarial. You're the Nevermore student, Hermione said, sitting down. I read about the exchange program. Nevermore's approach to curse breaking is apparently well ahead of the standard curriculum. Are you in 6th year? I thought the exchange was for 6th years, 5th, Wednesday said. Oh. So are we, well, Harry and Ron are. I'm revising ahead for, sorry, I'm Hermione Granger. Wednesday Addams. She studied Hermione with the same careful attention she'd given everything else that morning. Quick eyes. Rapid processing. The particular kind of intelligence that was always slightly faster than the conversation around it. Also, no trace of the 14th curse's influence. Hermione pushed toward Harry rather than away. That was interesting. Either she was naturally resistant or the curse was selective. You're loyal, Wednesday observed. Hermione blinked. Yes, I like to think so. Not as a character trait. As a practical decision you make consistently regardless of cost. That's different. Wednesday returned to her toast. It's noted. It's useful. Ron looked at Harry. Is she always like this? I've known her for 7 minutes, Harry said. Fair. She told me I have 14 death curses on me, Harry added. Ron's bread roll hit the table. Hermione, to her credit, didn't drop anything, but her eyes went very sharp very fast. 14, what kind? Are they active? I'll explain later, Wednesday said. I need the morning to compile a proper analysis. Suffice to say, 6 of them require immediate structural assessment, 3 require counter-curse research that goes beyond standard Hogwarts curriculum, and 1 of them requires identifying who placed it within the last 2 months from Harry's immediate social circle. She looked at them both, measuring. You 2 are candidates by proximity. I'm excluding you based on behavioral indicators, but I wanted you to be aware of my methodology. Ron stared. You thought it was us? I eliminated you. There's a difference. She put her book back in her pocket. I'm going to need access to the restricted section. I'm going to need someone who can provide historical records of the curses placed on Harry without filtering them through the headmaster's office. And I'm going to need to contact my family. Your family? Hermione said. Yes. Wednesday stood up from the table, collecting her things with the precise economy of someone who never made an unnecessary movement. My father will want to know about this. He has some history with the darker branches of European curse work, and my mother's knowledge of blood magic is without equal on this continent. She paused, looking at Harry. We will fix this. Not because I've committed to your cause or find your particular situation especially sympathetic. But because the number 14 offends me, and because the 14th curse in particular is one I have a professional objection to. Harry looked up at her. The isolation one. Yes. Whoever placed it understood that the most effective way to neutralize a person isn't to kill them. It's to make sure they're alone when it matters. She met his eyes. I find that philosophy indefensible. She left him there with his cracked glasses and his layered curses and the sudden, vertiginous sensation of being seen by someone who was not offering comfort or prophecy or the weight of expectation, just the clean, uncomplicated offer of a problem being taken seriously. Fred leaned over from 2 seats down. "Mate," he said to Harry, with the reverence usually reserved for truly exceptional magical phenomena, "I think she might be our favorite person." "She's terrifying," Ron said. "Those aren't contradictory," George said. Harry picked up his fork, and for reasons he couldn't have entirely articulated, his hands were steadier than they'd been in weeks. Wednesday walked the corridor toward what she'd been told was the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom, taking stock of the castle as she went. The magic in the walls was old and layered and enormously complex. Hogwarts itself was sentient in a way that Nevermore was not, more architectural personality than design system, and it seemed to be deciding what to do about her. She noticed 2 staircases adjust their trajectory as she walked, guiding her left rather than straight. She went straight anyway. The data classroom was smaller than she'd expected and had the lingering magical residue of at least 4 different teaching philosophies, none of them consistent with each other. This year's professor was apparently named Umbridge. She'd read the name on the staff list and cross-referenced the Ministry of Magic's recent educational interventions. She'd formed an opinion. She took a seat in the back row. The class filled around her with the now familiar buffer zone, students arranging themselves at careful distances while trying to look like they were choosing seats rather than avoiding one. She found this restful. She needed room to think. She had already, in the hour since breakfast, begun drafting a letter home. It was composed in her head in the crisp, efficient language her mother had taught her, describe precisely, interpret carefully, ask only what is necessary, and she was refining it while the students around her unpacked textbooks and discussed the previous lesson with the resigned air of people who already knew they were getting a substandard education. A toad entered the classroom. This was not, Wednesday realized after a moment, literally a toad. It was Professor Umbridge, in a pink cardigan the color of a rash, with a broad, flat face and small eyes that darted across the class and landed on Wednesday with the specific calculation of a bureaucrat identifying a thing that might need to be filed under problem. "You must be our transfer student," Umbridge said, in a voice like syrup poured over something rotting. "Miss Addams. From Nevermore Academy." The name produced a small, sugary pause. "We'll have to see how your previous education measures up to Hogwarts standards, won't we?" Wednesday looked at her. Umbridge was used to children looking away. She was not used to children looking at her, steadily and without effect, the way a naturalist might look at a specimen that was doing something expected. "I've reviewed the Hogwarts data curriculum through 6th year," Wednesday said. "I'm approximately 2 years ahead. But I'm happy to observe." Umbridge's smile stayed exactly the same size. This, Wednesday noted, was a practiced skill. "We'll be the judge of that, dear." "Of course," Wednesday said, and opened her notebook. The lesson that followed was, in Wednesday's professional assessment, an organized suppression of practical magical knowledge disguised as education. Umbridge had them read from a textbook. The textbook was written at approximately a 7-year-old's level and made no distinction between defensive and offensive magic, which indicated either intellectual laziness or political intent. Given the ministry affiliation, Wednesday assigned 60-40 odds toward the latter. She took notes. Meticulous ones. Not of the lesson but of Umbridge, her word choices, her deflection patterns, the particular way she'd rewarded a boy who said he didn't need practical dark arts training with a gleaming, cat-like approval that was about power consolidation rather than pedagogy. When Umbridge asked, at the end of class, whether there were any questions, Wednesday raised her hand. Umbridge looked surprised. She'd apparently expected the new girl to remain unobtrusive. "Yes, dear? If we encounter a dark curse in the field and we're only permitted to read about it theoretically, what's the practical response framework? We hope, Umbridge said pleasantly, that we never encounter dark curses in the field, because the Ministry is doing an excellent job of ensuring our world is safe. That assumes the Ministry's threat assessment is accurate. Wednesday wrote something in her notebook. The 14 active curses on a 15-year-old student in this school suggest it may not be. The silence that followed was the particular kind that happens when a stone is dropped into still water, the ripple moving outward from the point of impact, reaching every corner before the sound finished. Umbridge had stopped smiling. I'm not sure where you heard, I identified them myself. This morning. Wednesday capped her pen. I can provide the full taxonomy if that would be useful for the Ministry's threat assessment revisions. The bell rang. Wednesday stood, collected her notebook, and walked out. In the corridor, Harry fell into step beside her with the slightly stunned expression that she was already beginning to recognize as his default reaction to her. You said that in front of everyone, he said. I know. You deliberately told Umbridge, who reports directly to the Ministry, that you know about the curses. Yes. Why? Because I want whoever placed the 14th curse to know I found it. She didn't slow down. When you're hunting something, it's often more efficient to let it know it's being hunted. Prey that panics makes mistakes. Harry walked beside her in silence for a moment. That's either brilliant or going to get us both killed. Possibly both. This is Hogwarts, from what I understand. He laughed. It was a better laugh than the one at breakfast, less surprised, more genuine. She noted this without analyzing it, which was unusual for her. I need to send a letter to my family tonight, she said. I'd like to use the Owlery, but my messenger doesn't use owls. What does it use? His name is Obscurus. He's a raven with a grudge against the postal system, but he's reliable. She paused. Your Owlery will smell differently after, but it will pass. Wednesday. She looked at him. Why does the 14th curse bother you more than the others? He asked. The Horcrux one sounds objectively worse. She considered the question. It deserved an honest answer. The Horcrux fragment is structurally dangerous and has a solution, even if the solution is deeply unpleasant. Dark objects have defined removal parameters. She walked 3 more steps. The 14th curse is designed to make sure you have no one standing with you when it matters. That's not a dark object problem. That's a strategy. Someone planned specifically for you to be alone. She didn't look at him when she said it. I find planned isolation more offensive than planned death. It's more personal. Harry didn't say anything for a moment. I have been pretty alone, he said. More than people realize. I know. That was the design. She stopped at the corridor junction where she needed to turn left for Charms. I'm going to write home tonight. My family will want to be involved in this. Your family. He said it the same way Ron had, with the same slight hesitation, as if the word opened onto something he didn't have a map for. My parents. My brother. Various others. We're close. She said this without sentiment, just fact. When the Addams family becomes aware of a situation that requires attention, they give it their full attention. What does that mean, exactly? She turned to go. Over her shoulder, you'll see. Tell Professor McGonagall I'll need a corner of the Owlery this evening. And tell her not to worry about the smell. A beat. Much. She walked away. She was already composing the letter. Dearest Mother, she began in her head, her steps measured and even on the stone floor. I've arrived at Hogwarts and I've been here 11 hours and I've already found something interesting. There's a boy here who's been used as a chess piece by everyone around him for his entire life and nobody has told him. He has 14 death curses on his person, one of which is a Horcrux, and one of which was placed by someone currently in his social circle with the specific intent of leaving him isolated. He's remarkably resilient given the structural damage, and he laughed at something I said this morning, which I found surprisingly pleasant. I'd like Father to research the isolation curse signature. I'll send the parameters separately. I think this is going to take longer than a year. I don't mind. Also, the defense against the dark arts teacher is a ministry puppet in a pink cardigan, and I've already told her I know about the curses. I expect this will produce results within the week. Please send the good grimoire. Not the second one. The first one. All my love. Wednesday. She walked to Charms. The castle adjusted 2 more staircases around her, and this time she thought it might not be resistance so much as testing, the old magic of the walls seeing what she'd do. She went the efficient route. The staircases, after a moment, settled. In the Ollery that evening, by the light of a lantern she brought herself because the place was dim and she needed her writing to be precise, Wednesday sat on a barrel and wrote the full letter, detailed, specific, attaching a separate parchment with the curse parameters encoded in the shorthand her family used, a system based on her great-grandmother's notation and entirely opaque to anyone outside the household. Obscurus arrived in response to her whistle through the open window, landed on her arm with the casual territorial confidence of a bird who owned whatever perch he landed on, and took the letters in his beak with an air of professional sufferance. Harry had come to the Ollery too. She'd heard him on the stairs, his footstep pattern distinct, the slight drag on the left side that she'd identified as a healed injury not quite healed, and now he was sending something to Sirius, she thought, or perhaps the werewolf professor. She didn't ask. She respected operational compartmentalization. He came to stand beside her after his owl had gone, watching Obscurus bank and vanish into the darkening sky over the forbidden forest. "Your family's going to come here?" he asked. "My father will. My mother will send guidance. My brother will probably follow. The others," she considered. "My uncle Fester has expressed interest in Britain since we were children. He'll want to see the restricted section. That's a lot. You have 14 curses on you. That requires resource allocation." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "My family never, I don't really have, I know," she said. "That's partially the 14th curse and partially circumstances that were designed." She watched the tree line, where the forest darkened into genuine mystery. "It's not your fault. People don't usually, everyone usually tells me to. I'm not going to tell you to be grateful. More actions request aborted. Write the next chapter now." Chapter 2, The Family Arrives. The owl from Dumbledore arrived at the Addams household at 6:43 in the morning, which was unfortunate for the owl. Gomez Addams was in the middle of his morning fencing practice when it came through the study window, and the owl, a large, officious-looking tawny thing with the bearing of a bird that had delivered important correspondence to important people and knew it, flew directly into the path of a saber thrust that Gomez redirected at the last second out of what he would later describe as courtesy toward the postal system. The owl dropped the letter, righted itself with tremendous dignity, and left through the same window considerably faster than it had entered. Gomez caught the letter without looking at it, finished his combination, lunge, parry, riposte, the riposte a little extravagant because Tuesday mornings deserved extravagance, and then sheathed his saber and held the envelope up to the light coming through the tall, cracked windows of the study. Official Hogwarts seal. The headmaster's personal wax, a deeper purple than the institutional stamp. Written in the particular cursive of a man who'd been important for a very long time and knew how to make ink communicate authority. Gomez opened it with his thumbnail, which was faster than any letter opener and more satisfying. "Dear Mr. Addams, I understand your daughter arrived at Hogwarts 3 days ago, and I write to assure you that she has settled in admirably. The staff have found her to be a student of considerable ability and, naturally, a distinctive personality. However, I must respectfully request that her correspondence home refrain from suggesting that our school's protective measures are insufficient, as this creates." Gomez stopped reading it, refrained from suggesting, and turned the letter over to see if there was more on the back. There wasn't. "Kara," he called, already walking toward the morning room where Morticia would be tending the plants that required early attention. Morticia Addams was standing at the window with a pair of garden shears, removing the petals from a white rose with the focused calm of someone performing a task they found genuinely therapeutic. She was in a black silk dressing gown. Her hair was still loose, which meant it was early enough that the day hadn't required full deployment. She looked up when Gomez came in, read his expression, and put the shears down. "Wednesday," she said. The headmaster wrote. He handed her the letter. He'd like Wednesday to stop implying their security is inadequate. He was already grinning. The grin was the one that appeared when something had gone delightfully sideways. She told them, Kara. Day 1. Morticia read the letter with the speed of someone who had learned long ago to identify what was being said around what was written. When she finished, she set it on the windowsill and picked up Wednesday's letter, which had arrived the previous evening via Obscurus and which she'd read 4 times because Wednesday's descriptions were precise enough to be read multiple times and produce new information each pass. She read the relevant section again, one of which was placed by someone currently in his social circle with the specific intent of leaving him isolated. The 14th curse, she said. The 14th curse, Gomez agreed. Someone in his immediate circle placed it. Someone with sustained access. She set Wednesday's letter down and looked at her husband with the particular expression she wore when she had already arrived at a conclusion and was giving him time to catch up. This is not a rogue action by a random Death Eater, Gomez. No, he said. It's not. He was quiet for a moment, which was rare enough that it meant something. Then, she's right to be bothered by that one most. She's always right. Morticia crossed to her writing desk, which occupied the corner of the morning room under a painting of a storm at sea done entirely in shades of black. She pulled out a sheet of paper. I'm going to write to Dumbledore. I'll go in person, Gomez said. Morticia looked up. We should both go, he said. Take the car. Visit Wednesday, see the school, have a conversation with this headmaster about what 14 curses on a student means for his institutional liability. The grin again, sharper this time. And I'd like to meet this boy. Morticia considered this for precisely 3 seconds, which was her usual response time to Gomez's better ideas. Thursday, she said. That gives Wednesday 4 days to prepare the ground. And gives Dumbledore 4 days to think our response is going to be a letter. She smiled at that, a slow, rare thing that meant she was genuinely pleased. I'll arrange the car. I'll arrange the swords. Gomez. 1 sword. Gomez. It's Britain, Kara. You always need a sword in Britain. She turned back to her letter. 1 sword, she said, which both of them understood meant 2. The car arrived at the Hogwarts gates on Thursday morning at 10:45, which was the middle of 3rd period, which meant the maximum number of students were inside classrooms and the minimum number of staff were outside to observe the arrival. This had been deliberate. The car was a 1938 Rolls-Royce hearse that Gomez had converted for personal use sometime in the 1950s, painted the black of a held breath, with chrome fittings that gleamed like something that knew it was being looked at. It pulled up to the iron gates with a sound like deep organ notes, idled for exactly 4 seconds, and then the gates, which were locked, sealed with several varieties of protective enchantment, and explicitly closed to non-scheduled visitors, opened. They opened because the enchantments tried the Addams family and then apparently decided, with the instinctive wisdom of very old magic, that there were things you didn't stand in the way of. The groundskeeper, Hagrid, was the first person they encountered, coming around the side of the castle with a bucket and the expression of someone who'd been expecting a quiet morning. Gomez stepped out of the car and extended his hand with the enthusiastic warmth of a man who genuinely enjoyed meeting new people, which he did, as long as they were interesting, and Hagrid, 8 feet of not entirely human with a beard that could shelter wildlife and a face that had clearly taken some serious magical damage at some point and healed authentically rather than cosmetically, was, Gomez decided immediately, very interesting. Gomez Addams, he said, shaking Hagrid's hand with both of his and genuine vigor. Wednesday's father. This is my wife, Morticia. Morticia extended her hand. Hagrid shook it with the careful delicacy of a large man who'd learned to calibrate his grip around fragile things, and then looked slightly surprised, because Morticia's grip had calibrated to match his exactly. "Right," Hagrid said, recovering. "Professor Dumbledore's expectin', yeah. I can take ya up to the castle, we'd love that," Gomez said. "Tell me, what is that on your other shoulder?" "That's a blast-ended scrit scar, isn't it? I heard about those creatures. Fascinating. Absolutely no survival justification for their design. What was the encounter like?" Hagrid blinked. "Well, I mean, they were a bit of a project of mine, actually. Most people don't really appreciate, most people lack imagination," Gomez said, falling into step beside him with the comfortable authority of a man who went wherever he intended to go. "Tell me everything." Morticia walked on Hagrid's other side, her heels finding the uneven ground of the path without any apparent difficulty, and she looked at the castle as they approached with an expression of genuine appreciation. "How old is the North Tower?" she asked. "Oh, 10th century, the original structure. The newer additions are only 12th, she said, studying the stonework. "The southern annex is 12th century but they use 10th century stone. They were trying to hide the renovation." She tilted her head. "Interesting. What were they renovating over?" Hagrid looked at her. "How did ya? I mean, there's a chamber, there's always a chamber," Morticia said, with the satisfied tone of someone who loves being right about exactly this kind of thing. By the time they reached the castle entrance, Hagrid was telling them about the acromantulas in the Forbidden Forest with the enthusiasm of a man who'd been waiting years for an audience who wouldn't immediately call for exterminators, and Gomez was listening with the focused attention he gave things that genuinely interested him, which was many things but magical giant spiders particularly. Wednesday was waiting in the entrance hall. She'd clearly known they were coming, the slight adjustment in her posture when she saw them, the 2-degree unbending that was, for Wednesday, equivalent to running across a room with arms open. Gomez picked her up, which she allowed, and held her for 3 seconds before setting her down with the kind of physical affection that the Addams family distributed without self-consciousness and that Wednesday had decided, at roughly age 4, she didn't actually object to despite what she told everyone. "You look well," Morticia said, studying her daughter's face with a mother's precision. "I look the same as I always look." "You look engaged," Morticia said, which was different, and Wednesday knew it, and didn't argue. "The headmaster is expecting us at 11, Wednesday said. "I've prepared a brief." "Of course you have," Gomez said warmly. "He doesn't know what's in it." "Even better." Dumbledore's office was at the top of a spiral staircase behind a gargoyle that moved aside for them after a password Dumbledore had sent to the gates via a house elf, and the office itself was, Gomez noted, looking around with genuine appreciation, the room of a man who had lived a very long time and kept everything. Portraits of previous headmasters lined the walls. Instruments of unclear purpose occupied every available surface. And behind the desk, rising as they entered, was Albus Dumbledore in deep blue robes with a half-moon glasses and the bearing of a man who had not, in quite some time, been in a room where he was not the most powerful person. He looked at Gomez and Morticia Addams and Gomez could see him recalibrating, a subtle but definite adjustment, the kind a good chess player made when the opening moves didn't match any pattern they recognized. "Mr. and Mrs. Addams," Dumbledore said, warmly. "Welcome to Hogwarts. Please, sit down." "Wonderful place," Gomez said, sitting without being told, which was faster than waiting and meant he was choosing his own position relative to the desk. "The castle's wards are extraordinary. 3rd century in some of the deeper layers, pre-Roman, if I'm reading the resonance correctly. Are those blood wards or sacrifice wards in the eastern foundations?" Dumbledore sat down. Something in his expression said this was not how these conversations usually began. "That's a perceptive observation, Mr. Addams. The deeper foundations do contain, Gomez, please. We're going to be here for a while, I think." He smiled with complete, genuine warmth. "Now. My daughter has sent me a very detailed report about the 14 curses active on Harry Potter, and I have some questions." The temperature in the room didn't change. Dumbledore's expression didn't change. But something shifted, a micro-adjustment in how he was holding himself, a fractional increase in the attention behind his eyes. Gomez had spent 60 years reading rooms and people, and he read this one clearly. The old man had known, or known enough, and had been managing the information rather than addressing it, and he had not expected anyone to walk into this room and name the number 14 with the casual directness of someone discussing a scheduling conflict. "I wasn't aware that the full," Dumbledore began. "The isolation curse," Morticia said quietly, from the chair beside Gomez. She'd been still since she sat down, the stillness of someone who was listening to everything including the silences. "When was it placed?" A pause. "I'm not certain which curse you're, the 14th one," Wednesday said, from the door. She'd positioned herself there without being asked, which meant she'd planned her own role in this conversation, and it was peripheral until it wasn't. "The unraveling curse. The one specifically designed to prevent Harry from maintaining close social bonds. Someone placed it within the last 8 months. Someone with sustained access." She looked at Dumbledore. "You have a list of people with that access?" "I'd like to see it." Dumbledore looked at her for a moment, a long, measuring look, the kind he probably gave students he was trying to assess. Wednesday gave it back to him with the same flat patience she'd been giving back to adults since she was 3. "You are remarkably like your mother," he said finally, which was aimed at Morticia. "She's better than me in several respects," Morticia said, without false modesty. Dumbledore folded his hands on the desk. He was, Gomez thought, genuinely brilliant. You could see it, the quality of his thinking, the way he was processing multiple angles simultaneously. He was also genuinely used to being the smartest person managing any given situation, and that habit had become, over time, a kind of enclosure. A very comfortable, well-intentioned cage. "I have been aware," Dumbledore said carefully, "of several of the curses Wednesday identified. The situation with Harry's scar, as Wednesday terms it, is one I have been researching for several years. The approach has it's required keeping him uninformed," Gomez said, pleasantly. "The decision to withhold certain information was made to protect, it made him easier to position," Morticia said, even more pleasantly. "I'm not saying that was your intent. I'm saying it was the structural outcome." She adjusted the position of her gloves on her knee with the precision of someone buying a moment for effect. "My daughter identified 14 curses in under an hour of proximity. She identified the isolation curse, which was placed deliberately by someone in Harry's circle, within that same hour. Would you like to tell me why no one in this institution, in 5 years, identified that curse and traced it to its source?" Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of evasion, Gomez had spent enough time around evasion to know its texture, but the quiet of a man confronting something he'd chosen not to confront and finding the choice, under examination, uncomfortable. "Some things," Dumbledore said, "I believed were better managed," Gomez said. "Yes." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and the warmth in his face didn't diminish, but something underneath it clarified, the way firelight looks different when you understand how hot it actually is. "Albus. I've lived a long time. Not as long as you, but long enough to know what managed looks like from the outside. You've been managing Harry Potter like a resource allocation problem. Input, output. Sacrifice, victory." He said it without anger. That was the thing, the absolute absence of heat in his voice, because he didn't need heat. He's a child. He's a child with 14 curses on him and no family, and someone in his immediate circle is running an isolation campaign on him, and the man who is supposed to be responsible for his safety has been, what's the word, Kara? Optimizing, Morticia said. Optimizing. For an outcome. Gomez sat back. "I'm not here to be your enemy, Albus. I'm genuinely not. But I am here to tell you that the Addams family is involved in this now, and we don't optimize. We commit." Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. Then, slowly, Something in the old man's expression shifted, not capitulation, not agreement, but the specific expression of someone encountering a perspective that has found a crack in their architecture and is letting light in where they didn't expect it. "What is it you want, Mr. Addams?" he asked. "Gomez." He smiled. "And I want 3 things. I want full access to the curse documentation on Harry Potter, everything you have, without filtering. I want a Wisengamot consultation on the protection wards, because someone bypassed them to place the 14th curse and that means your security has a gap you haven't found. And I want Harry Potter to be told the truth about his situation." He paused. "All of it. The Horcrux. The prophecy. The isolation curse. The works." "The prophecy could, he's 15, Morticia said. "He's been living inside the consequences of that prophecy since he was 1. The least he deserves is to know the text." Silence. Then Dumbledore said, quietly, "You're right." Gomez blinked. He hadn't expected it this fast. "I have," Dumbledore said, and his voice had the careful flatness of a man choosing his words because the honest ones were not comfortable, "made decisions about Harry's life that I would make differently now. I still believe, that the strategic picture required, Wednesday said from the door, someone to volunteer to die. She wasn't cruel about it. Just clear. You've been preparing him to sacrifice himself and calling it protection." Dumbledore didn't answer. "That changes," Gomez said. "Not because we've taken over, this is your school and your war and your prophecy, and we respect that. But Harry Potter has the Addams family at his back now, and that means someone is going to be fighting for him instead of just with him. That's a different thing." He stood up. "Wonderful office, by the way. Is that a Fwooper in that cabinet? You shouldn't keep them in enclosed spaces, the song accumulates. Let me show you a containment method my uncle Festilio developed in the 30s, Gomez," Morticia said, rising with the fluid authority of someone who always knew when to redirect. "Right. Yes. We'll have tea." Dumbledore, who had just had the most fundamentally unsettling conversation of his last decade in a frame of complete cordiality, looked at Gomez Addams and said, helplessly, "Yes. I suppose we will." Harry found out they were there at lunch. Fred told him, because Fred had heard it from a 5th-year Hufflepuff who'd been near the entrance hall when the hearse arrived, and the description had gone through 3 people before it reached Harry and still contained the words actual hearse and the gates just opened and I think the woman killed a rosebush by looking at it, which last detail Harry suspected was an exaggeration until he met Morticia and reconsidered. Wednesday found him before he could find her parents, intercepting him in the corridor outside the Great Hall with the directness of someone who'd been tracking his location and wanted to control the introduction variables. "My parents are here," she said. "My father would like to meet you. I'm warning you in advance." "Warning me about what?" "He's very enthusiastic. It's authentic. It can be overwhelming if you're not prepared for it. More overwhelming than you telling me I have 14 death curses. Different." She considered. "He's going to like you. He likes people who've survived things that shouldn't be survivable. He finds it romantic. Not in a, it's a specific kind of enthusiasm. Tilt your chin up when you shake his hand, it helps. What does that? He respects people who take up space. You have a habit of making yourself smaller than you are. Don't." Harry looked at her. "You've been studying how I carry myself." "I study everything." She paused. "It's not unfriendly." They found Gomez and Morticia in the entrance hall, which Gomez had apparently adopted as a temporary base of operations, and they were deep in conversation with the Weasley twins, which, Harry registered this with the specific dread of 2 things that shouldn't interact suddenly interacting, was either wonderful or catastrophic and probably both. The issue with standard Peruvian instant darkness powder, Fred was saying with the speed of someone running through a genuine intellectual problem, is the dispersal radius is fixed, variable dispersal, Gomez said immediately. You need a secondary compound in the casing that responds to ambient temperature, it contracts in cold and expands in heat, so the powder disperses to the radius appropriate for the environment. He snapped his fingers. I worked something similar in the 30s with a Chilean alchemist. Extraordinary woman. She lost 2 fingers to the process, but she considered it worth it. We could test that, boys, Morticia said, without heat, and both Gomez and the twins paused. It was impressive, Harry thought, the specific gravity she put into 2 syllables. We have a guest. Gomez turned, and Harry had exactly a second to remember Wednesday's advice, chin up, take up space, before Gomez Addams crossed the entrance hall with the speed and intention of a man who had somewhere he very much wanted to be, which was apparently right here, and extended both hands with the warmth of a fire someone lit on purpose rather than by accident. Harry, he said. Gomez Addams. Wednesday's father. He shook Harry's hand with both of his, gripping firmly, and something in his face, the brightness of it, the absolute genuine attention, reminded Harry of nothing he'd experienced and everything he'd wanted to. I've heard about you for years. The way the wizarding press tells it, you're either a hero or a liar, and the fact that those are their only 2 categories tells you everything about the wizarding press. He still had Harry's hand. Wednesday tells me you survived a killing curse at 15 months, 7 near-death experiences since the age of 11, and 14 active curses, and you still show up to class. He grinned. I find that magnificent. Harry didn't know what to do with that. Nobody had ever called his survival magnificent. Inconvenient, mostly. Suspicious sometimes. Occasionally miraculous in a way that put the miraculous weight on Harry to justify. Thank you, he managed. How's your shoulder? Wednesday mentioned a previous injury on the left side, healed but not completely. Basilisk Fong, Harry said. 2nd year. Gomez made a sound of genuine appreciation. You killed a basilisk at 12. It almost killed me first. The best ones always do. He released Harry's hand and stepped back, still grinning. Morticia. Come and meet Harry. Morticia Addams moved through the entrance hall the way weather moved, not hurried, but inevitable, and you became aware of her before she arrived. She was taller than Harry expected, dark-haired, with the kind of stillness that wasn't passivity but concentrated attention. She took his hand and held it for a moment and looked at him with eyes that were doing something similar to what Wednesday's did, reading, cataloging, assessing, except where Wednesday's gaze was like a scalpel, Morticia's was like a tide. It covered everything at once. Harry, she said. It's good to meet you. You too, Mrs. Addams. Morticia. She released his hand and looked at him for one more moment. You're hungry, she said. What? You've been hungry for a long time. Not just food. She said it without pity, which was the only reason it wasn't unbearable. We're going to address that. Harry looked at Wednesday, who was standing 3 feet away with the expression she wore when something was proceeding according to her expectations. I warned you, she said. Ron and Hermione arrived at 6 past noon, drawn by the gravitational pull of something unusual happening in the entrance hall, and the introductions overlapped into a kind of orchestrated chaos that Gomez navigated by simply treating everyone as if they'd been friends for years, which had the disorienting effect of making it feel like they had been. It was during this, the twins showing Gomez a schematic of something they'd been working on while Ron accepted a piece of what appeared to be dried fruit from a pocket in Gomez's coat with the resigned willingness of someone who'd given up asking where food came from, and Hermione asking Morticia about blood ward theory with the barely contained excitement of someone who'd found a genuinely superior source. That Harry found himself standing next to Wednesday slightly outside the circle of it. All. They do this everywhere, she said. Arrive and make it theirs. It's not deliberate. They're just present. Completely present, wherever they are. Harry watched Gomez throw his head back and laugh at something Fred had said, a full-body laugh, uninhibited, the laugh of someone who found life genuinely funny rather than performing amusement. He's not at all what I expected. What did you expect? I don't know. Something darker. He paused. More like the way people describe your family. People describe us as macabre and disturbing, Wednesday said. They're not wrong about the macabre. They're wrong about what it means. She watched her father. He loves everything. Passionately and completely. The darkness he's drawn to is the darkness that has weight to it, things with history, with mortality built in, with stakes. He finds life most alive at the edges of it. She paused. It's not so different from your situation, actually. You've been most present when you were most at risk. That's not a flaw. Most people think it is. Most people find the edge uncomfortable because they've never learned to stand on it. She looked at him. My family lives there. We find it homey. The ministry owl arrived at 2:15, while they were still in the entrance hall, or rather, Gomez and the twins had relocated to a side corridor to test a theory about dispersal compounds, and Hermione had gone back to class, and Ron was finishing a second piece of whatever fruit, and Harry and Wednesday were discussing the parameters of the third and fifth curses with the concentrated focus of people who'd found a shared problem interesting enough to lean into. The owl landed on Morticia's arm without being invited, deposited an envelope with the ministry seal, and waited with the bearing of a bird that had been told to wait for a response. Morticia read it in approximately 15 seconds. The ministry, she said, is requesting that we submit to an interview regarding our unscheduled access to Hogwarts grounds and our contact with a protected minor. She set the letter down. They've also included a note suggesting that our identification of security concerns within the school could constitute interference with a ministry-regulated institution. Harry felt the old familiar weight, another authority deploying bureaucracy as a weapon, another system reminding him of his powerlessness inside it. Wednesday looked at the letter and then at her mother. How are you going to respond? Morticia picked up the ministry's owl, looked it in the eye, and spoke to it with the calm authority of someone who had decided what the conversation was going to be. Tell your people, she said, that the Addams family will be happy to meet with the ministry at their convenience, and that we'll be bringing our legal counsel and a full documentation of 14 active dark curses placed on a 15-year-old student in ministry-regulated institution, including one placed in the last 8 months by someone currently in the building, and that we're very much looking forward to the discussion. She released the owl. Good day. The owl left. Ron stared. You can't just, they're the ministry, they manage a regulatory body, Morticia said, returning to her chair with the ease of someone who just handled a minor correspondence task. We are a family. These are different categories of authority. But they could, Ron, Harry said, and something in his own voice surprised him, the steadiness of it, the absence of the usual low dread that the word ministry produced. I think they're fine. Ron looked at him, then at the Addams family, then back at Harry. Something in his expression shifted, the recognition that the dynamics of the situation had changed in some fundamental way, that Harry Potter for the first time in 5 years was not the smallest power in any given room. Okay, Ron said. Okay, yeah. He looked at the dried fruit in his hand and decided, apparently, to finish it. The afternoon passed in a kind of productive chaos. Gomez spent 2 hours with the cursed documentation Harry had access to, the portions Dumbledore had reluctantly released that morning, after their meeting, and cross-referenced it against what Wednesday had already compiled. He worked through it with the focused efficiency of a man who found this kind of problem genuinely engaging, annotating in a cramped, energetic script that moved across the parchment like it was in a hurry. The third curse is definitely the diary, he said, looking up from the pages he'd spread across the floor of an empty classroom Dumbledore had assigned them. Wednesday was on one side of him, Harry on the other, and Morticia was in the corner writing correspondence with the focused serenity of someone who could compose precision documents in any environment. The magical signature matches a diary Horcrux, same maker, same method. You destroyed it in second year. Basilisk Fong, Harry said. The Fong broke the object but the resonance remained. Like a bell that's been rung, the sound goes on after. Gomez tapped the page. That one's straightforward. Magical residue, not active curse. We can clear it with a standard harmonic reversal. Wednesday, you know the method? Yes, she said, not looking up from her own notes. Good. The eighth one is what I want to look at. He moved to that section of the documentation. Someone placed a monitoring curse inside a tracking charm inside something I haven't seen in 30 years. This is professional work. This is someone who knows curse layering. He looked at Harry over the top of the documentation. Harry. Who has had regular access to you for the last 8 months who wasn't in your life before this year? Harry thought. Umbridge. Obviously, Wednesday said. I've already begun documenting her access patterns. Anyone else? He thought harder. There was a new ministry liaison who came in September. I've only seen her twice. Name? Yaxley. No, wait. She said her name was Yaxley. But she signed ministry paperwork as, he frowned. I can't remember. It was a long name. Double-barreled. Wednesday was already writing it down. I'll cross-reference the ministry staff lists tonight. Good girl, Gomez said, with the automatic warmth of a parent whose child has just confirmed their competence, and Wednesday received this with the same practiced non-reaction she used for everything but which was, Harry noticed, fractionally different from her non-reaction to other things. It was still light when Gomez and Morticia made arrangements to stay at the Three Broomsticks in Hogsmeade for the week, at least, perhaps longer. Let's see how things develop, and walked Wednesday and Harry to the castle entrance for the evening curfew that even the Addams family respected on the first visit. At the door, Gomez put one hand on Wednesday's shoulder and one on Harry's. Here's what I know, he said, with the directness of a man who decided to be clear. There are 14 curses on this boy. One of them is a soul fragment. One of them was placed by someone in this building in the last 8 months. And there is a Dark Lord who has been operating on the assumption that Harry Potter has no one genuinely, unconditionally in his corner. He looked at Harry. That assumption is now incorrect. Harry looked back at him. He had spent 15 years managing the specific weight of being a problem too large for anyone to fully commit to, too dangerous to get close to, too significant to be allowed to be ordinary. He had gotten used to qualified support, people who were for him and for the greater good, and for the strategy, and for their own survival, and Harry somewhere in that list of ands. Gomez Addams had just removed all the ands. Thank you, Harry said, and his voice did the thing it sometimes did when he was less guarded than he meant to be, went quieter, more honest. Gomez squeezed his shoulder once, the grip of someone who meant it, and then released him with the same naturalness. Get some sleep, he said. We have work to do tomorrow. The grin, sudden and warm as sunlight through old glass. The interesting kind. He and Morticia walked back toward the gates, and Harry watched them go, and Wednesday stood beside him, and the evening came down over the castle in shades of grey and blue and the particular color of October that meant the year was turning and something was ending and something was, possibly, beginning. 14 curses, Harry said. 14 solutions, Wednesday said. He looked at her. That's how it works, she said. In my family. Every problem has a solution. The solution isn't always comfortable or conventional or what you expected. She looked at the gates, where her parents had just passed through into the darkening road beyond. But we solved them. Harry nodded slowly. Okay, he said. And for the second time in a week, his hands were steadier than they had any logical reason to be. Chapter 3, Weapons and Allies. Pugsley Addams arrived on a Saturday. He arrived via the Hogwarts Express, which he'd boarded alone at King's Cross with a trunk, a duffel bag, and what the conductor had initially assumed was a carry-on until it moved. He was 13, broad-shouldered, with the cheerful solidity of someone who'd never particularly minded being underestimated because the moment people started underestimating you was the moment they stopped watching what you were doing with your hands. Wednesday knew he was coming. She'd received his letter 4 days earlier, short, characteristically Pugsley, reading simply, Father says you found something interesting. Bringing supplies. Don't tell me not to come. She hadn't told him not to come. She'd written back with a list of specific materials she needed and the train schedule. She met him at the Hogsmeade station at 2 in the afternoon, which was overcast and smelled like rain and wood smoke and the particular cold that meant the Scottish Highlands had stopped being scenic and started being serious. Pugsley came off the train behind 3 Hufflepuff's sixth years who parted around him with the instinct of people who couldn't identify the specific threat but recognized that one existed. He saw Wednesday and grinned. She looked at him with the closest thing to relief she ever showed, which was a fractional reduction in the set of her jaw. "You look the same," he said. "It's been 3 weeks. I thought England might change you." "England has had no effect on me whatsoever," she said, picking up the smaller of his bags without asking. "What's in the trunk?" "Components. Some assembled, some not." He fell into step beside her. "The moving thing in the duffel is Aristotle. I brought him because he's been sulking since you left and it was affecting his explosive yield." "You brought the ferret." "The ferret missed you. Aristotle is a destructive sociopath who once detonated a section of garden wall." "I know. He misses you." They walked through Hogsmeade toward the castle. Pugsley looked around at the village with the assessing gaze of someone cataloging resources, the apothecary, the joke shop, the pub, the post office, the relative distances between each. "Dad says there's a Dark Lord." "Yes." "And 14 curses." "Yes." "And a ministry official in a pink cardigan trying to run an educational suppression campaign inside the school." "Yes." He nodded, satisfied, the nod of someone who has arrived at a job and confirmed that the job is real and substantial. "Good. I was worried it was going to be boring." He adjusted the duffel on his shoulder. Something inside it made a small sound of protest. "I looked up Hogwarts history on the way down. The school has a chamber of secrets, a haunted forest, a resident dragon colony, and a ceiling that's cosmically inaccurate by 14 degrees due to a miscalculation in the original enchanting." 13 degrees. "I checked. I stand corrected." He glanced at her. "Tell me about the boy." Wednesday walked 3 steps before answering, which Pugsley knew meant she was deciding how to frame something. "Harry Potter. 15. Remarkable survival record. Structurally undervalued by everyone responsible for him. Intelligent but undertrained. Loyal to a degree that's been exploited systematically." She paused. "He laughed at something I said on the first day." Pugsley looked at her sideways. "Did he?" It was contextually appropriate laughter. "I'm not reporting it as unusual." "You literally just reported it." Wednesday didn't respond to this, which was itself a response, and Pugsley filed it under noted with the care of a younger sibling who had survived 13 years of Wednesday through attentiveness and strategic silence. They met Fred and George Weasley at the castle gates, which had opened for Pugsley the same way they'd opened for his parents, not immediately and not with enthusiasm, but with the resigned grace of wards that had assessed the situation and decided resistance was a poor investment. Fred and George had been told about Pugsley via Wednesday, who had described him in 4 words, capable, unsupervised, bring earplugs. They had interpreted this correctly as high recommendation and had been at the gates since 1:45. "Wednesday Addams," Fred said. "Fred and George Weasley," Pugsley said. "He can tell us apart," George said to Fred, with the tone of someone genuinely moved. "Wednesday sent me behavioral profiles." Pugsley set his trunk down and opened the duffel bag, from which a large, rust-colored ferret emerged, assessed the environment with rapid professional thoroughness, and then climbed Pugsley's arm to his shoulder. "This is Aristotle. He's had some training." Fred looked at the ferret. "What kind of training?" "The applied kind." Pugsley looked at them with the friendly directness of someone who didn't waste time on pretense. "Wednesday says you've been running detonation tests solo and you need better yield control. I have components for a variable dispersal secondary compound and I need someone who knows the local environment well enough to identify test sites that won't get us expelled." Fred and George looked at each other with the simultaneous expression of people who have just found their third. We know every secret passage, hidden room, and overlooked exterior space in this castle, George said. And Hogsmeade, Fred added. And 3 locations in the Forbidden Forest that even Hagrid doesn't know about. Pugsley grinned. It was the grin of someone who had found exactly the right place to be. Show me the forest ones first. Harry met Pugsley at dinner, where the Addams sibling had installed himself at the Gryffindor table beside the twins with the ease of someone who sat wherever he liked and found this entirely normal. He had a plate piled with everything available and was eating with the focused efficiency of someone who treated meals as fuel rather than social ritual, which was different from Wednesday's way of treating meals as an opportunity to observe the social dynamics of the people eating around her. "You're Harry," Pugsley said, when Harry sat down. "Yeah. I'm Pugsley. I've heard about you." "Same." Harry looked at the duffel under the bench, from which periodic small sounds emerged. "Is there something alive in that bag?" "Aristotle. He's fine. He gets carsick on the train and needs to decompress." Pugsley passed the bread basket without being asked, which Harry registered as the particular social intelligence of someone who paid attention to what people needed before they said it. Wednesday gave me the full curse breakdown. The 3rd and 5th ones have the most interaction problems. They're cross-referencing in a way that's amplifying the residual drain on your core. You're probably tired more often than you should be. Harry stared at him. "Wednesday did say you were capable." She said, "capable and unsupervised, which is more accurate." He reached for the peas. "The isolation curse is the one I want to work on. I've been thinking about it on the train. Isolation curses of that complexity require a sustained anchor. They don't just sit on the target, they need a point of origin they can draw from. Like a tap connected to a pipe. If you find the anchor, you can cut the connection without having to address the curse directly on your end. And the anchor would be something belonging to whoever placed it. An object, most likely. Something they keep close and keep charged." He looked at Harry calmly. "Someone in your immediate circle placed it. That means the anchor is probably in this building." Harry absorbed this. Wednesday thought it was someone with sustained access. Possibly Umbridge. Possibly. But Umbridge is ministry, she thinks in policy, not precision curse work. The 14th curse is precision work. It's elegant. Ministry people don't usually do elegant. He shrugged. "I could be wrong. I'm working with limited data." "You're 13, Harry said. 14 next month." He ate a forkful of potato. "Age is just proximity to birth. My sister identified a Horcrux at breakfast on her first day. We just know things our age group usually doesn't." Ron, who had arrived mid-conversation and been absorbing it in stages, leaned over. "How is your whole family like this?" "Like what?" "Like, switched on. All the way switched on. All the time." Pugsley considered this. "Dad says the Addams family learned a long time ago that the world is more interesting than frightening, as long as you understand it well enough. Most people are afraid of things because they don't understand them. We just study them instead." He looked at Ron with genuine curiosity. "You have 6 siblings?" "Yeah." "What's the resource competition like?" "The, what?" "For parental attention." 6 siblings, moderate household resources, how do the younger ones establish differentiation?" Ron opened his mouth, closed it, and then said, honestly, "Some of them are still figuring it out. Bill was the responsible eldest, Charlie was the passion pursuit, Percy was the institutional validation, Fred and George are the creative disruptive pair, you're," Pugsley looked at him assessingly, "the loyalist. You define yourself through relationship rather than individual achievement. It's a legitimate strategy, but it means you undervalue your own judgment in contexts where your judgment is actually better than the people you're deferring to." Ron stared. "That's not a criticism," Pugsley added. Loyalty as a primary value is extremely useful. It means you can be counted on, which is rarer than people think. He returned to his dinner. Wednesday likes you. She doesn't say so, but she included you in her ally assessment. Wednesday likes me. She didn't say she didn't like you in a context where she was actively criticizing everyone else. That's how Wednesday likes people. Hermione, sitting across the table, had been listening with the expression she wore when she was encountering a perspective that was rearranging something in her mental furniture. She didn't say she didn't like me either, she said, with the combination of analysis and hopefulness that was distinctly Hermione. You made her ally assessment too, Pugsley confirmed. She used the word formidable, which is the closest she gets to impressed. He went back to eating. The table was quiet for a moment with the specific quality of people who have just had things said to them that they're going to think about for weeks. The first Death Eater attempt came on Wednesday. Not Wednesday the person, Wednesday the day, for days after Pugsley's arrival, in the late afternoon when the light came low and orange across the grounds and most students were either in class or heading toward dinner. Harry was at the lake with Wednesday, the actual person, going through the harmonic reversal process for the third curse, which required sustained concentration and an isolated environment. Gomez had taught it to Wednesday 2 days earlier during a session that had apparently also involved Morticia demonstrating a blood ward deconstruction technique that left the castle ghosts hovering at a respectful distance for the next 6 hours. The reversal process involved Wednesday holding both hands approximately 3 inches from Harry's temples, not touching, while Harry held absolutely still and she worked through the curse's resonance structure layer by layer, her face the specific concentration of a musician sight-reading a difficult piece. It wasn't comfortable, there was a persistent low-grade pressure, like the beginning of a headache, and the occasional sharp note when she touched a particularly knotted section. Stop tensing, Wednesday said, for the 3rd time. I'm not tensing on purpose. Your left shoulder goes up when the pressure increases. Put it down. Harry put it down. The pressure built again and his shoulder went up. It's involuntary, I know. I'm telling you anyway because having something to actively resist distracts you from the passive resistance. She didn't look up from whatever she was seeing in the space between her hands and his head. Tell me something. Tell you what? Anything. Keep your attention divided. It helps. Harry thought for a second. I used to think the lake was the most peaceful place on the grounds. Second year, when everything was, there was a period when I used to come here alone just to be somewhere the castle wasn't watching. The castle watches everything. I know that now. But I didn't know it then and the not knowing was enough. He kept his eyes on the water. You can trick yourself into peace if you're desperate enough. She was moving through something delicate, he could tell by the almost imperceptible slowing of her hands. Did it work? Sometimes. For an hour or 2. A beat. Your family doesn't need tricks like that. We need other things. She didn't elaborate immediately. Then, working through what was clearly a knotted passage, my family is very present with each other. All the time. It can be a lot. The presence. Something loosened. He felt it as a reduction in the pressure, a small release. I came to England partly because I needed to be somewhere new. Somewhere I was discovering rather than known. And then you found me. And then I found you. No effect in her voice, just confirmation. The castle ghost in the East Wing, the Bloody Baron, asked me what I was looking for. 3rd night. What did you say? I said I'd know it when I found something with 14 curses on it. Another loosening. The headache was receding. That was a joke. I know. He almost smiled. I noticed. She withdrew her hands. The 3rd curse residue, the diary's lingering resonance, the bell still ringing after the bell had been rung, was gone. He felt its absence as a kind of lightning, as if something he'd been carrying for so long he'd stopped noticing its weight had been set down. Better? She asked. Yes. He actually felt it, physically, a reduction in the persistent background drain he'd attributed to anxiety or poor sleep. Is that what 3 felt like? What does 1 feel like? We're not touching the first one yet. The Horcrux fragment removal requires the full process. My father needs to be present, Hermione needs to have finished the research she's doing on the extraction theory, and I need another 2 weeks of preparatory work. She sat back on the grass beside him. The 14th one we address last. Why last? Because whoever placed it will feel the anchor lose its connection and they'll run. I want to identify them before we cut it. She looked out at the lake. Pugsley's theory about the anchor object is right. I've been doing proximity sensing for 3 days. The source is inside the castle. You can feel it from here. I can feel the direction. Not the specific location. She looked at him sideways. You've been in every part of this castle. Where does the background feel most wrong to you? Not dangerous, wrong. Off. Like a clock that's running slightly fast. Harry thought about it seriously, because Wednesday asked questions seriously and deserved the same. The trophy room, he said. I've always felt uncomfortable in the trophy room. I thought it was because of the detention I had there in first year, polishing trophies all night. But it was more than that. It was, he paused. Like something in the room was paying attention. Wednesday was very still. Like being watched, she said. More than watched. Like being recorded. She stood up in one motion. Show me the trophy room. They were 15 feet from the castle entrance when the 3 figures appeared at the tree-line. Harry saw them first, because he'd been trained by 5 years of surviving to notice things that moved wrong against their background, and these 3 moved with the deliberate concealment of people who thought they were hidden. Black robes. Masks. The masks were the new Death Eater design, plain white, no decoration, which meant active rather than ceremonial. He had his wand out before he'd fully processed the thought. Wednesday turned without him saying anything. She'd apparently registered his change in stance, and looked at the tree-line with the calm of someone identifying a type of problem rather than experiencing the onset of crisis. 3, she said. Death Eaters. Active ones. He was already moving, positioning himself between Wednesday and the tree-line, which she observed and did not comment on. We should get inside. Why? Because there are 3 of them and 2 of us. There are 3 of them, she said, and you've survived a killing curse, and I was doing advanced combat curse work at Nevermore before I came here, and we're 30 feet from a castle full of our allies. She looked at the 3 figures, who had stopped moving at the tree-line and were apparently waiting for something. They're not here to attack immediately. They're here to deliver something. A message, or an object, or a threat. They want us to run inside so they can claim they drove us off. Harry lowered his wand marginally and looked. She was right, the body language was wrong for an attack. They were positioned defensively, not offensively. Waiting. What do you want to do? He said. I want to walk toward them, she said, at a moderate pace, and see what they're here to do. That's, if they raise wands, we have distance and I have a proximity curse that will lock their nervous systems before they finish a casting motion. She said this the way someone else might say I have an umbrella in case it rains. I've been working on it all week. Harry looked at the tree-line. Looked at Wednesday. Looked back. Okay, he said. They walked toward the tree-line at a moderate pace, and Harry watched the 3 figures recalibrate. Watched the uncertainty move through them as the targets didn't run, as the script they'd prepared became suddenly inapplicable. When they were 20 feet away, the central figure raised one hand. Potter, said a voice from behind the mask. Male. Controlled but with the specific vibration of someone maintaining control through effort. We're here with a message from the Dark Lord. Say it, then, Harry said. A pause. The figure had expected fear, or defiance, or the particular trapped animal quality that Harry had apparently projected in enough previous encounters that it had become an expectation. He didn't project it now. He was standing straight, wand at his side, and beside him Wednesday Addams was looking at the three Death Eaters with the attentive calm of a person who has found a new specimen. "The Dark Lord extends an offer," the figure said. "Surrender now. Come willingly." "He will be, no," Harry said. Another pause. "You haven't heard, I heard enough." "No." He looked at the central figure steadily. "Take the message back. Tell him I'm busy." Something shifted in the group. The rightmost figure moved, not toward Harry, but toward Wednesday, a lateral adjustment, a flanking consideration. Wednesday didn't look at that figure. She said, without raising her voice, "If you complete that movement, I'll introduce your nervous system to a curse I developed at 14. You'll spend 3 weeks learning to hold a spoon again." The figure stopped. "Also," she said, "your anchor object is in the trophy room." "I know what it is now." She was looking at the central figure. "I know which of you placed the 14th curse on Harry, because the curse work is the same signature as the monitoring charm on the object you left in the trophy room. Elegant work. Much better than your colleagues." She tilted her head slightly. "Whoever trained you was very good." The central figure had gone very still. "That's not a threat," she said. "That's information. I wanted you to know I have it because it means you have a choice now. Retrieve the anchor object before we do, in which case I lose the evidence of your signature, or leave it and we remove it, in which case your employer loses his monitoring capability and I have documentation of your magical signature that I can submit to 3 separate international curse regulation bodies." She waited. "You have until tomorrow morning," she said. "Either way, the 14th curse is broken by Thursday." The 3 figures were silent for 5 seconds. Then the central one turned and walked back into the trees. The other 2 followed with the slightly uncoordinated speed of people who weren't sure whether they were retreating or strategically withdrawing and had settled on the ambiguity for comfort. Harry watched the tree lean until they were gone. Then he looked at Wednesday. "You identified the curse caster just now," he said. "Yes." "From the positioning?" "From the fact that when I mentioned the anchor object, only the central figure reacted with recognition. The other 2 reacted with confusion, they didn't know what I was referring to, which means they weren't briefed on the full mission, which means they weren't the one who placed the curse." She started walking toward the castle entrance. The central figure's wand hand went to their left hip when I described the signature. People touch their wand instinctively when their specific casting is referenced, it's a protective response, like touching a wound someone's mentioned. So the central figure placed the 14th curse. He fell into step beside her. "Do you know who it is?" "Not yet. But I will by tomorrow." She paused. "We should get to the trophy room. You want to go there now?" "After 3 Death Eaters they're gone. They'll report back and debate their options and the debate will take at least tonight. The anchor object is most vulnerable right now, while they're in transit." She was already moving faster. "Come on." The trophy room was on the 3rd floor, a dusty high-ceilinged space lined with glass cases of silver cups and shields and plaques commemorating achievements going back centuries. Harry had spent a memorable night in here in first year and had avoided it since with the specific avoidance of places associated with miserable experiences. The wrongness hit him as soon as he walked in, more pronounced now that Wednesday had asked him to pay attention to it, the sensation of being recorded, something in the room processing his presence. Wednesday walked directly to the 3rd case from the left on the north wall, without hesitating, and looked at the objects inside through the glass. Her eyes moved across 3 trophies, 2 plaques, and a small bronze medal, and stopped. "There," she said. Harry looked. A small bronze medal, slightly different in color from the others, not tarnished in the same way, carrying a different kind of age. The small card beside it read, "For special services to the school. Tom Marvolo Riddle. 1943, that's," Harry started. "Voldemort's award," she said. 50 years old and still active. The curse was anchored to it because it already carries his resonance, it's like using an existing magical structure instead of building a new one. She looked at it with what might have been professional appreciation. Very efficient. Can you take it? I can take it. Breaking the connection will alert whoever placed the fourth curse, they'll know the monitoring capability is gone. But breaking it also means we can clear the 14th curse without a fight. She looked at him. Your call. He looked at the metal for a moment. Then, take it. She opened the case, which hadn't been locked. The ward on it was sophisticated but apparently hadn't been designed to stop someone who could read its structure, and lifted the metal out with one gloved hand. Even through the glove Harry could see the magical resonance discharge, a faint light that lasted a quarter second. The wrongness in the room evaporated. Done, she said. The alert that reached Gomez Addams at the 3 broomsticks came via Morticia, who had received it via a method that the landlady of the establishment couldn't quite describe afterward beyond a change in the air, like before lightning. Morticia had put down her pen and sent a message back, 3 words, in the family shorthand, and then returned to her correspondence with the serenity of someone who had assessed the situation and found it handled. The message she sent was, "Come for breakfast." Gomez arrived at Hogwarts at 8 the following morning, before most students had gotten through their first cup of tea, and he came in through the front gates with the energy of a man who was looking forward to his day. He found Harry, Wednesday, Pugsley, Fred, George, Ron, and Hermione in the small classroom that had become their unofficial operations room, arranged around the metal on the central desk like an archaeological discovery. The anchor object, Gomez said, picking it up and turning it in his hands with the precise attention of someone reading a physical object. And this was in the trophy room for 50 years, Wednesday said. Riddle's original resonance, plus a fresh curse anchored to it 8 months ago. Someone who knew what they were looking for, Gomez said. He set the metal down. Someone who had access to Hogwarts records or history, knew about Riddle's award, and had the curse work skill to anchor a monitoring curse to an existing 50-year-old magical object without destabilizing it. He looked at Harry. This isn't a Death Eater foot soldier. This is someone with formal education in curse theory. That narrows it significantly. Snape, Ron said immediately. I thought Snape, Harry admitted. But the curse signature Wednesday identified is, not Snape's, Wednesday said. She'd been waiting for this, Harry thought, had the information ready and was presenting it at the point in the conversation where it would land with maximum clarity rather than maximum drama. I cross-referenced the signature parameters against the staff magical records I asked Professor Dumbledore for yesterday. The technique matches 2 people, one who left the school 10 years ago and one who arrived this year. The room went quiet. Umbridge, Hermione said softly. No, Wednesday said. Umbridge doesn't have the skill. But the person who trained Umbridge in curse theory in her 3rd year at Hogwarts 40 years ago did. She looked at them steadily. There's a portrait in the headmaster's office of a former professor. Headmistress Dolores Umbridge studied under her for 6 months before this professor left under circumstances the records describe as mutually agreed departure. She paused. The portrait has been in the office for 30 years. Portraits of former staff have full access to the school's magical architecture and can communicate with living individuals through the portrait network. Gomez made a sound of genuine appreciation. She anchored the curse through a portrait. Through a portrait in a room where Dumbledore has been working for 30 years, across the hall from where Harry comes for private consultations twice a year. Wednesday looked at the metal. She's been watching him in Dumbledore's office. Every conversation. Every strategy session. Every private word. The weight of it settled on the room. Harry felt it, the specific violation of it, the knowledge that the space he'd thought was his safest was compromised, that conversations he'd had there had been monitored, that decisions had been made about him in that room while something watched and reported. Which portrait, he said, his voice level. Headmistress Elidora Black, Wednesday said. She's in the 2nd row, left wall. She looks like she's sleeping most of the time. What do we do with that? We don't remove the portrait, Wednesday said immediately. If she knows we've identified her, she disappears into the portrait network and we lose her. We treat her as an asset going forward, we control what's said in that office, which means we can feed her false information. She paused. But first, we need to tell Dumbledore. He's going to be upset, Hermione said. He's going to be furious, Gomez agreed, with the mild satisfaction of a man who found righteous fury appropriate in this context. Good, Harry said, and his voice had an edge that hadn't been there 3 days ago. He should be. The confrontation with Dumbledore happened at 10 that morning, in the headmaster's office, which was, for the first time in 30 years, occupied by people who knew there was a spy in the room and were conducting themselves accordingly. Wednesday had briefed them on the walk up, keep it factual, keep it brief, don't look at the portrait. Gomez had agreed with the strategic assessment and added his own observation, Albus needs to feel the full weight of this before we hand him the solution, otherwise he'll manage it rather than address it. Morticia, who joined them from Hogsmeade, had listened to both and said nothing, which meant she agreed and had additional considerations she'd raise when the moment was right. Dumbledore received them with his characteristic warm gravity, and it was Gomez who laid it out, quickly, plainly, the medal on the desk, the portrait on the wall, the 40 years of methodology that had treated the headmaster's private office as an intelligence resource. He didn't perform it. He simply said it, and watched Dumbledore's face go through a progression of expressions that covered, in order, skepticism, dawning understanding, controlled fury, and something under the fury that was older and heavier than anger. Elladora Black, Dumbledore said, very quietly. Second row, left wall, Wednesday said. There was a long silence. The portrait in question appeared to be sleeping, as it usually did. She's been there for 30 years, Dumbledore said. Every strategic discussion. Every assessment of Harry's, he stopped. The line of his jaw was tight. Every conversation about the Horcrux. Every conversation, Wednesday confirmed. Voldemort's known about the Horcrux theory, Harry said. He's known what we know. The implications were arriving in sequence, each one worse. Every time we've been one step behind, he was reading the map, Morticia said quietly. Dumbledore stood and moved to the window, his back to the room, and stood there for a moment with the specific stillness of a man processing something that required reconstruction of his entire model of the last 30 years. When he turned back, his eyes were very clear and very old and had the quality of something resolved. Tell me what you need, he said to Wednesday. She told him. The Portrait Network access, the Wisingamot documentation on portrait as intelligence precedent, the authority to restrict the office without removing the portrait, and a formal statement from Dumbledore that the Addams family had full institutional cooperation in the curse remediation work. He agreed to all of it without negotiating. That afternoon, Pugsley, Fred, and George ran what they called the first field test of the variable dispersal prototype in an exterior corridor of the East Wing that had been unused since 1987. The test involved a modified Peruvian instant darkness powder with the temperature-responsive secondary compound Gomez had described, deployed from a modified Zonko's instant darkness casing that George had redesigned from scratch over the previous 3 days. The test was successful in ways that exceeded projections. The darkness that deployed was not the standard blanket effect, it was targeted, directional, warm responsive, and when Aristotle the ferret ran through it, Aristotle had apparently volunteered for this phase, carrying a small heat source in his harness, the darkness followed him like a spotlight in negative, covering his path but leaving the rest of the corridor clear. Tactical concealment, Pugsley said, watching Aristotle emerge from the other end of the corridor with the professional satisfaction of a ferret who has completed a mission successfully. You could use this in a corridor fight, a crowd, any situation where you need to conceal movement without blinding your own people. We're going to be rich, Fred said. We're going to be useful, George corrected, with uncharacteristic seriousness, and Fred looked at him and nodded. Yeah, Fred said. Yeah, that first. Harry and Wednesday came through at the end of the test, and Harry looked at the still settling powder residue and said, "That's incredible," with the directness of someone who meant it. "It needs refinement," Pugsley said. "Temperature calibration is off by about 12% in cold environments. But the principle is solid. He looked at Harry. Also, I've been thinking about the 6th and 7th curses, the ones that interact with each other. If we address them simultaneously instead of sequentially, the interaction effect becomes the mechanism for the removal instead of the problem. Simultaneously, Harry said. Is that, untested, Pugsley said cheerfully. But theoretically elegant. Wednesday. Harry looked at her. She had already been thinking about it. He could tell by the slight tension in the set of her shoulders that meant she was running calculations. I'd need a containment field during the process. Someone to hold the perimeter while I work the removal. I can do that, Harry said immediately. She looked at him. You've never done containment work. Teach me. The look that crossed her face was brief and quickly restrained, something that wasn't quite surprise and wasn't quite the satisfaction of a solved problem but was in the neighborhood of both. All right, she said. Tonight. In the operations room. Fred leaned over to George and said, very quietly, Are they? Don't, George said, with the wisdom of someone who had watched enough of this to know the terrain. I'm just saying, I know what you're saying. Don't. Fred considered. He laughs more than he did a week ago. I know. And she does the thing where she's not quite, George, Fred said, apparently confusing himself. I know, George said, and they watched Harry and Wednesday walk back toward the castle in the grey afternoon light, not touching, not side by side exactly but with the particular proximity of two people calibrating for each other without deciding to. That evening, Aristotle the ferret delivered a small rolled note to Harry's dormitory windowsill at 9:45, which read, in Wednesday's handwriting, containment lesson postponed. Found something in the 6th curse structure. You need to see this tomorrow. Get some sleep. And then, below that, after a gap that suggested the pen had been lifted and put down and lifted again, you did well today at the lake and at the Treeline. You didn't make yourself smaller. Harry read it twice. Then he folded it and put it in the chest by his bed, where he kept the things he wanted to be able to find. He slept better than he had in months. Chapter 4, Umbridge makes a mistake. The educational decree came on a Monday. It arrived as they all did, posted overnight on every notice board in every common room, the ministry seal gleaming with the particular smugness of official documentation that knew it couldn't be argued with. This one was Educational Decree No. 31, and it read, in Umbridge's preferred font of small, precise bureaucratic certainty, that all student organizations, clubs, teams, and groups required ministry approval before convening, that any unapproved gathering of 3 or more students for educational purposes constituted a violation subject to immediate expulsion, and that the Hogwarts Inquisitorial Squad, a new body, announced in the same decree, had authority to detain suspected violators pending investigation. Harry read it at breakfast, standing at the notice board with Ron and Hermione on either side of him, and felt the familiar cold weight of an institution closing its hands around something he hadn't yet named as precious enough to protect. Wednesday read it 40 seconds later, having come down the stairs at her usual pace and stopped at the notice board with the detachment of someone reading a species classification rather than a threat. She read it once, completely, and then turned away. She's moving faster than I expected, she said. We're breaking the isolation curse this week, Harry said. She might have felt the anchor object go dark. She might have. Wednesday filed this in the rapid internal catalog she kept of information and its implications. Or someone warned her that the Addams family is asking inconvenient questions about institutional security gaps. She looked at the notice board one more time. Either way, she's escalating on a Monday, which is a reactive rather than strategic timeline. She's worried. That makes it worse, Hermione said, with the particular dread of someone who understood bureaucracy. Worried people with institutional power make mistakes, Wednesday said. Which is what we need. She went to the table and poured herself tea. Leave the decree alone for now. Don't react to it visibly. Ron looked at the notice board, then at his friends, then at Wednesday. You want us to just ignore it? I want us to look like we're ignoring it, while doing the opposite. She picked up her cup. By Thursday. What happens Thursday? My Uncle Fester arrives. This produced a pause around the table that had a specific texture, the pause of people who'd encountered Pugsley and Gomez and Morticia and were now attempting to extrapolate what the next member of this family might be like, and arriving at answers they found simultaneously exciting and unsettling. Wednesday, Harry said carefully. What is your Uncle Fester like, exactly? He's the most knowledgeable person alive on the subject of practical dark magic applications and countermeasures, she said. He once held a live Cruciatus curse in a contained field for 40 minutes to study its decay pattern. On himself. On himself. He said it was illuminating. He was perfectly fine afterward except he had trouble with Tuesdays for about 3 weeks. She took a sip of tea. He's also the kindest person I know, after my father. He makes excellent soup. Ron opened his mouth, closed it, and then said, right. With the acceptance of someone who has decided that the frame of reference he grew up with is no longer sufficient for his current situation. Umbridge found Wednesday at 11 that morning. This was not an accident. Umbridge had been building toward a direct confrontation since Wednesday's first data class, and the educational decree had apparently given her the framework she needed to make it official. She intercepted Wednesday in the corridor outside Transfiguration with 2 members of the newly formed inquisitorial squad trailing behind her like ducklings in matching badges, and she smiled the smile of someone who had decided they held the winning card. Miss Addams, she said. I'd like a word. Wednesday stopped walking and looked at her. Several reports have come to my attention that you've been holding unauthorized educational gatherings in the school. Curse work sessions, I understand. Practical applications, unsupervised. The smile widened by a millimeter, just enough to suggest satisfaction. Under the new decree, that constitutes a violation. I see, Wednesday said. You'll need to come with me to my office. For what purpose? A small pause. Umbridge was used to that question from adults, not from students. To discuss the violation and its consequences. I wasn't holding educational gatherings, Wednesday said. I was engaged in private curse remediation for a student who had 14 active dark curses on his person, which constitutes medical care, not education. Medical care isn't governed by Educational Decree No. 31, which specifies educational purposes in its operative clause. She reached into her robe pocket and produced a parchment, which she offered to Umbridge. I've documented the curse inventory and the remediation methodology, co-signed by my parents who are both qualified curse workers. It's been submitted to the Hogwarts Board of Governors and the Department of Magical Education as a medical record. It is not, in any legally defensible reading of the decree, a violation. Umbridge looked at the parchment. She didn't take it. Furthermore, Wednesday said, pocketing the parchment with the ease of someone who had prepared for this response, the installation of an inquisitorial squad constitutes an enforcement body within the school, which under Section 14 of the Hogwarts Charter requires headmaster approval. I've checked the approval records. The decree specifies the squad's authority but the charter precedence hasn't been addressed. She tilted her head slightly. You may want to talk to someone at the ministry about that before the squad detains anyone. Unlawful detention of a minor is a significantly larger problem than unauthorized education. The 2 inquisitorial squad members looked at each other. Umbridge's smile was still in place but it had gone the way of a held breath, the effort of maintaining it was now visible. You're very well prepared, she said sweetly. Yes, Wednesday said. I wonder where a 5th-year student develops such familiarity with ministry regulatory frameworks. My father's legal library, Wednesday said. He has an extensive collection. He enjoys the law as a system of pressures and counterweights. He says it's the closest thing to fencing that doesn't require a sword. She looked at Umbridge steadily. Was there something else? There was a long moment during which Umbridge and Wednesday regarded each other with the mutual assessment of 2 people who have identified each other as the primary obstacle in their respective plans. Run along to your next class, dear," Umbridge said. "Thank you," Wednesday said, and walked away at exactly the pace she'd been walking before the conversation started. In her next class, Charms, which she found moderately interesting for its practical applications and deeply uninteresting as currently taught, she wrote a single note on a corner of parchment and sent it across the room to Harry via the Protean charm message system Hermione had developed for Dumbledore's army, which was technically an unauthorized student organization and which Wednesday had technically joined and which was therefore technically a violation of the new decree, though Wednesday had been careful to frame her attendance as observational rather than participatory. The note read, "She didn't take the parchment. Good. It means she's consulting someone before she acts on it. Find out who she contacted after this conversation." Harry, 3 rows away, read the note and passed it to Hermione, who had contacts in every administrative layer of the school through sheer force of information gathering in 5 years of knowing exactly who to ask. Hermione's response came back in 12 minutes, "Talk to her secretary." She sent a memo to the ministry. Specifically to the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Someone named Runcorn. Harry wrote back, "Is that bad?" Wednesday's response was instant, "Runcorn reviews procedural violations. If she's asking Runcorn rather than her direct ministry superior, she's not sure the decree covers me. She's looking for a workaround." A pause, and then, "Tell your father." "Not tell my father. Tell your father." Harry noticed this. Hermione, across from him, noticed him notice it, and chose not to comment, which was its own kind of comment. Wednesday Addams arrived Thursday morning via a method that no one at Hogwarts could quite reconstruct afterward. He wasn't on the Hogwarts Express. He wasn't in the carriage queue from Hogsmeade. He was simply, at 7:52 on a Thursday morning, in the entrance hall, in a large black overcoat and no visible hair, with a leather satchel over one shoulder and the particular quality of a man who had found his way to wherever he was going by means he considered irrelevant to share. He was, Harry thought, looking at him across the entrance hall, the least threatening-looking dangerous person he'd ever encountered. Round. Cheerful-faced. The kind of person you trust with your grandmother. He had a smile that was warm without being calculated and eyes that were, if you looked directly at them, the eyes of someone who had seen a great deal and found most of it interesting. Wednesday walked up to him and he picked her up in a hug with the ease of someone lifting something he loved, and she let him, her arms going around his neck for 3 seconds before she stepped back and immediately became professional again. "You're here," she said. "Your father's account of the situation was fascinating," he said. 14 curses. One of them a Horcrux shard. Someone using a portrait as an intelligence relay. He looked around the entrance hall with genuine appreciation. "Also, I've wanted to see the restricted section since 1974 and this seemed like the moment. Professor Dumbledore has given you access." "Wonderful. I have a list." He patted the satchel. "Also I brought things." "What kind of things?" "Useful things. Some components your brother didn't have. A few texts. A containment device I built in September that I think will help with the 6th and 7th curse simultaneous removal." He looked at her. "Also soup ingredients. I assumed the school food would be adequate but not excellent." "It's adequate," she confirmed. "Then I'll make soup." He looked past her at the group of students who had stopped moving through the entrance hall and were watching this interaction. His gaze traveled to Harry, whom he identified immediately with the specific recognition of someone who'd been briefed and was cross-referencing. He crossed the hall with the same warm directness Gomez had, but without Gomez's voltage, more the warmth of a fire than electricity. "Harry Potter," he said. "I'm Fester. I'm going to get those curses off you." He shook Harry's hand. "Nice to meet you." "You too," Harry said. And meant it, immediately, for reasons he couldn't have explained quickly. "Ron Weasley," Fester said, turning to Ron. "How did you? Wednesday's descriptions are very accurate." He turned to Hermione. "And you must be the one who's been doing the theoretical research." I read the framework summary you sent Wednesday. It's good work. The containment field calculation is slightly off in the energy dispersal projection, but the fundamental approach is correct. He said it without condescension, just a pure identifying a technical note. Hermione's eyes went wide with the specific delight of being taken seriously by someone at the top of their field. What's wrong with the dispersal projection? She said immediately. Walk with me to the library, Fester said, already heading in that direction, and I'll show you. Hermione looked at Ron and Harry, who both gestured for her to go, and she went with the speed of a person following knowledge rather than a person following a stranger. The Dada disaster happened at 2:15. Umbridge had clearly spent the intervening days talking to Runcorn and building a revised strategy, because she arrived at the afternoon Dada class with 3 new educational decrees rolled up under her arm and the expression of someone who has found a procedural angle they're satisfied with. The class was fifth-year Gryffindors, which meant Harry, Ron, Hermione, and the majority of Dumbledore's army, which meant the room was, from a tactical standpoint, not the audience Umbridge should have chosen for this particular move. She began the class normally, which was to say badly, reading from the textbook, refusing to demonstrate, rewarding passivity and penalizing questions. Hermione, still vibrating from her library session with Fester, made the mistake of asking a question about the practical application of the Patronus charm in the context of a Dementor encounter. Umbridge's smile went sharp. The Patronus charm is beyond the scope of this course, Miss Granger. But Dementors are managed by Ministry personnel, and students have no need of defensive magic against them. She set down the textbook. Which brings me to a related matter. It has come to my attention that several students in this class have been practicing unauthorized defensive magic. This constitutes, under the new decree, an expellable offense. The room went quiet with the specific quality of a held breath. I have here, Umbridge said, producing the rolled parchments with the satisfaction of someone playing a prepared hand, a list of names compiled from Ministry intelligence sources of students believed to be participating in an unauthorized organization conducting practical magical instruction. Harry's hand tightened on his wand under the desk. He felt the old calculation starting: how to minimize damage, how to protect the others, how to manage the situation. The door opened. Fester Addams walked in carrying a large mug of tea, looked around the room with mild curiosity, located Wednesday, and sat in the empty chair beside her with the ease of someone arriving exactly where they intended to be. Umbridge stared. "Hello," Fester said to her pleasantly. "I'm observing." "Carry on." Who are you?" "You can't be in this classroom, Fester Addams." "I've been appointed as a substitute instructor for Practical Dada curriculum, effective this morning." He produced a document from his coat pocket with the air of someone who had always had exactly this document. "Signed by the headmaster. And co-signed by the Board of Governors, since I understand you've been working with them." He took a sip of tea. "The appointment falls under the headmaster's emergency faculty powers, which predate educational decree authority. Section 6, if you want to check." Umbridge took the document. "Read it." Her face went through several things. "This appointment," she began, "is to address the documented gap in practical curriculum," Fester said. 14 active dark curses were identified on a student in this school. That suggests the practical curriculum has been insufficient in preparing students to identify and respond to active dark magic. I've been asked to fill that gap. He was completely pleasant about all of this. "I'm very good at it. Dark magic is something of a specialty. What is your qualification?" "I was published in the International Journal of Curse Theory 17 times between 1963 and 1981. I'm certified by the Dark Arts Remediation Authority in 6 countries. And I once contained a live Cruciatus curse for 40 minutes to study its decay pattern, which the authority considers either a qualification or a warning depending on how you look at it." He smiled with complete warmth. "Would you like to see the full CV? I have copies." The class had gone from held breath quiet to the specific electric silence of people watching something unprecedented. Umbridge rolled up her parchment list of names. I will be contacting the ministry about this appointment, she said tightly. Wonderful, Fester said. When you do, ask them about the headmaster's emergency faculty powers specifically. They tend to get overlooked. And also mention that we'd love a ministry representative to observe the practical sessions. Transparency is always good for institutional confidence. His tone remained warm throughout. Now, I think you had a lesson to finish. Please, don't let me interrupt. Umbridge looked at him, at the room, at the document in her hands, and at the 23 students watching her with the attention of people who would remember this moment in detail. She left. The room erupted the moment the door closed, a contained eruption, the Gryffindor version of a standing ovation, which involved several people speaking at once and Seamus Finnegan saying bloody hell with such feeling that it served as summary for everyone. Fester looked at the class. Right, he said. Practical dark magic identification and response. Let's start from the beginning because I understand there's been a curriculum gap. He set down his tea and stood up. Who can tell me the difference between a curse, a jinx, and a hex at the structural level? Not the effect level, the structural level. One hand went up. Wednesday's, flat and immediate. We'll get to you in a moment, he said to her. I know what you know. Does anyone else? He looked around the room. Yes. The boy with the red hair who isn't the Weasley brothers. Neville Longbottom, who had not raised his hand but had apparently been identified by something, went pink. I think it's the depth of the magical interference. Jinxes are surface, hexes go deeper, curses affect the core, Fester said. Yes. Correct, and more importantly, that's the right way to think about it, by depth rather than effect, because depth tells you removal methodology. He looked at Neville with the appreciation of someone who values accurate instinct over memorized theory. What's your name? Neville Longbottom. Longbottom. Good. Tell me, and this is a real question, not a test, have you ever had direct contact with a curse rather than a jinx? By accident or otherwise? Neville's face did something complicated. My parents, he said, very quietly. I saw the effects. The room went quiet again, different from before. Fester nodded. Cruciatus curse, I'm guessing, from the way you said it. Long-term exposure? Yes, Neville said. Then you know what a curse does to a person better than anything in a textbook. He said it without pity, with the same matter-of-fact engagement he gave everything, which was, somehow, more respectful than sympathy. That knowledge is going to be valuable in what we're doing here. Don't minimize it. He looked at the class. Nobody in this room should minimize what they know because of how they learned it. Ugly education is still education. The class ran over by 20 minutes, which no data class had done in years, and nobody left. What Fester taught them in that lesson was not the curriculum. It was better than the curriculum, it was the underlying structure of the curriculum, the why beneath the what, the difference between performing a protective charm and understanding what the charm was protecting against and why it worked. He didn't lecture at them. He interrogated the room in the best sense, pulling what they already knew and then explaining the gap between what they knew and what would actually save them. At the end, when students were packing up with the dazed energy of people who'd been thinking hard for 2 hours, Hermione caught Fester at the front of the room and said, with careful precision, the dispersal calculation. You said it was off. I've been thinking about it during the lesson. Is it the surface area assumption? Fester looked at her with genuine delight. Yes. The containment field assumes uniform surface area for the magical interference pattern, but the 6th and 7th curses interact asymmetrically. The field needs to be variable, Hermione said. Not a sphere. An irregular containment shape that responds to the actual interference pattern. Exactly right. He was beaming. That's going to require real-time adjustment during the removal. Which means whoever is holding the containment field needs to be responsive rather than static. Harry's been learning containment work, Wednesday said, from behind Hermione, where she'd been listening. I know, Fester said. That was the plan. He looked at his niece. How's he doing? Better than I expected, Wednesday said, which from her was practically a standing ovation. The ministry investigator arrived on Friday. His name was Dawlish, and he was an Auror, and he came with the bearing of someone dispatched to solve a specific problem efficiently, which was, the Addams family had created a documentation record of institutional security failures that the ministry would prefer to not have documented, and someone needed to come and have a conversation about what could and couldn't be made official. He arrived in Dumbledore's office at 10 in the morning, where he found Dumbledore, Gomez, Morticia, and Wednesday, all of whom had been there since 9:15. Dawlish made his case with professional efficiency. The documentation of 14 curses was potentially inflammatory. The ministry's position was that the school's security was adequate. The Addams family's formal record submission was causing administrative difficulties. Gomez listened to all of it with genuine attentiveness and then said, pleasantly, which of the 14 curses would you like us to remove from the documentation? I ask only because the documentation includes a Horcrux shard, and I want to understand which part of that the ministry prefers not to acknowledge officially. Dawlish paused. Also, Morticia said, from her chair, we should address the portrait intelligence relay. Do you want that in the main document or in a supplementary filing? It constitutes a 40-year security breach of the headmaster's private office. I assumed you'd want to flag that prominently, but some ministries prefer to bury significant failures rather than address them, so I didn't want to assume. Dawlish looked at the two of them. We have, Gomez said, 3 international curse regulation bodies receiving copies of our documentation this afternoon. That's a courtesy. We notified the ministry first because we believe in institutional respect. But the international filings are already scheduled. He spread his hands with the friendliness of someone offering a reasonable deal. Here is our position: the 14 curses are documented, the security failures are documented, and the isolation curse placed by a person still at large is documented. We're happy to work within the ministry's preferred timeline for addressing each of these, and we're happy to keep the methodology and findings under review rather than public, for a reasonable period, while the ministry acts on them. He paused. In exchange, we need 2 things: full access to Harry Potter's official magical health records, all of them, unedited, and the removal of Dolores Umbridge from her position at Hogwarts within the week. Dawlish stared. I can't. She installed an inquisitorial squad using an educational decree whose authority doesn't cover enforcement bodies under the Hogwarts Charter, Wednesday said. She refused to teach practical defense to students in an active dark conflict. She suppressed information about known threats. She held up the parchment she'd prepared. The charter violations alone are sufficient for removal. We've documented them. The international bodies will be very interested. The minister, Morticia said, with the serenity of someone laying a card she'd been holding for the right moment, has been receiving reports from Dolores Umbridge about conditions at this school that are, based on our assessment, materially inaccurate. We have documentation of the inaccuracies. The minister will want to know, privately, before this becomes a matter of public record, that he has been receiving misleading information. She let this settle. We're giving him the opportunity to act on accurate information instead. That's a courtesy. Dawlish sat in silence for a moment. I'll need to make some calls, he said. Of course, Gomez said warmly. Use the office. We'll get tea. By Saturday morning, Umbridge had received notice of a mandatory review period that required her immediate return to the ministry for administrative assessment. She was gone by lunch, moving through the entrance hall with her cat plate collection boxed up and her inquisitorial squad disbanded, and the expression of someone who had encountered a situation she didn't have a framework for and was retreating to get a better one. The students watched her go with the collective breath release of people who had been waiting for this. Fester was in the great hall when she passed through, eating lunch with Pugsley and the twins and taking notes on what appeared to be a collaborative schematic. He looked up when she passed and gave her a pleasant nod, which she did not return, and then went back to his soup. Harry watched from the Gryffindor table. Ron had his arms crossed and was watching Umbridge's retreating figure with profound satisfaction. Hermione was looking at her documentation, already moving on to the next problem. Wednesday sat beside Harry. 1 down, she said. 14 to go, he said. Well, 10, now. We've addressed 3.5. 3 2/3, she corrected, with the precision of someone who tracked these things to the decimal. The 5th curse has partially cleared since we addressed the interaction with the 3rd. The decay is accelerating. You notice that? I notice everything. She picked up her fork. We'll do the 6th and 7th simultaneously next week. Fester has the containment device ready. I need 2 more days on the preparation work and then we'll brief you on the holding position. Okay. He ate for a moment. Then, Wednesday. When Fester talked to Neville today. About his parents. Harry looked at his plate. The way he said it, ugly education is still education. He meant it. He always means it. My childhood was ugly education. He said it without self-pity, just as a fact, offered to her because she was the person he offered facts to. Most of what I know about surviving, I learned because I had to. She looked at him sideways. I know. Is that why the 14th curse bothered you? When you first saw it? She was quiet for a moment, the particular quiet that meant she was being precise rather than reticent. When I first saw the 14th curse, she said, I recognized the strategy immediately. Because it's the most efficient possible way to neutralize someone. Not to harm them. Not to kill them. To make sure that when the moment comes, they're standing alone. She set down her fork. And I looked at the structure of your life and I could see everywhere the curse had been effective. Places where connection almost happened and then, didn't. People who almost stayed and then left. Distance that seemed natural but wasn't. She looked at her plate. I've never been someone who objects to isolation as a concept. I like being alone. I find people exhausting in aggregate. But, he said. But isolation that's been engineered out of someone rather than chosen by them is different. That's not solitude. That's a wound. She picked up her fork again. And that wound was placed deliberately, on a child, by someone who understood what it would do over 15 years. A pause. I found that intolerable. He didn't say anything for a moment, because there wasn't anything sufficient to say. Then, for what it's worth. The engineering seems to be failing. She looked at him. The isolation thing, he said. It doesn't seem to be working as well as it used to. He met her look steadily. I have significantly more people in my corner this month than I did last month. Something moved in her expression. Brief. Controlled immediately. But real. Yes, she said. The anchor being removed will have accelerated the decay. She returned to her lunch. By Thursday it should be significantly less effective. And after Thursday? After Thursday we'll deal with it directly. She ate a forkful of food. And then you'll be stuck with all of us. You should prepare yourself. For the Addams family. For all of it. He looked down the table, at Ron, arguing with Hermione about something and grinning while he did it, at the twins, who had their heads bent over something with Pugsley that was almost certainly going to produce a small explosion, at Fester, who had produced a second bowl of soup and was apparently teaching Neville a basic curse analysis technique between bites. Neville's expression, the expression of someone who had been starving for this specific kind of teaching for 5 years, at Gomez. And Morticia, who had arrived for lunch and were seated at the staff table at Dumbledore's insistence, Gomez mid-story, and Morticia listening with the small smile she wore when he was telling a story she already knew but liked. He looked back at Wednesday. I'm not going anywhere, he said. She looked at him with the steady gray clarity of her eyes, and he had the sense of being seen, not evaluated, not assessed, just seen, which was different, which was the difference between a scalpel and a window. No, she said. You're not. She went back to eating. He went back to eating. Fester's voice carried down the table, explaining something to Neville with patient enthusiasm. Aristotle the ferret, who had apparently escaped from Pugsley's room again, ran across the Gryffindor table behind the bread basket and disappeared under the bench with the professional discretion of an animal who had places to be. It was, Harry thought, the most ordinary extraordinary moment he'd experienced in 5 years of extraordinary moments. And then Hermione leaned across the table and said, "Harry. The restricted section research on Horcrux extraction, Fester and I found something this morning you need to see." The ordinary moment ended. The next one began. Chapter 5, The War is Declared. The Horcrux extraction research changed everything. Hermione spread the notes across the operations room table at 9 that evening, her own work and Fester's, cross-referenced and annotated in 2 distinct handwriting styles that had somehow, over 4 days, begun to influence each other at the margins, Hermione's precision loosening slightly toward Fester's energetic sprawl, Fester's sprawl tightening in places toward Hermione's exactitude. The synthesis of 2 people thinking hard about the same problem. Harry sat across from her. Wednesday was to his left. Fester stood at the end of the table. Gomez and Morticia had come up from Hogsmeade at Fester's request, and they stood together slightly apart from the table in the particular configuration of people who were present to support rather than direct. Pugsley was on the floor in the corner with Aristotle on his lap, apparently doing something with a length of copper wire and a small containment crystal, but Harry had learned that Pugsley's apparent distraction was generally a form of parallel processing. Ron and Hermione sat together. The twins had been asked to wait outside, which they'd accepted with suspicious good grace that probably meant they were doing something interesting in the corridor. The standard understanding of Horcrux extraction, Hermione began, with the focus of someone who had rehearsed this and wanted to get it right, is that it requires the destruction of the container. The container has to be destroyed to release the soul fragment, that's why a basilisk fawn works, or fiendfire. The object has to be unmade. But Harry isn't an object, Wednesday said. Right. Harry isn't an object, he's a person, and you can't unmake a person to extract a soul fragment, or rather, you can, but the soul fragment is the problem, not the solution. Hermione looked at her notes. Every text on Horcrux removal assumes object containers because Horcruxes are supposed to be placed in objects. What Voldemort did, accidentally fragmenting into Harry, isn't documented anywhere in the literature as a deliberate method. Because he didn't mean to do it, Harry said. Which means the fragment isn't structured the same way a deliberate Horcrux is. Fester leaned forward, taking over the thread with the ease of someone who'd been carrying it for days. A deliberate Horcrux is placed with intent, the fragment is anchored to the container by the will of the caster. It's a willful act of soul-splitting that creates a structured bond between fragment and container. He tapped the notes. What happened to Harry was an accidental rebound. The fragment didn't anchor by intent. It anchored by proximity and survival instinct. The soul fragment needed somewhere to go when the curse rebounded, and it found the nearest living magical vessel. Which was me, Harry said. Which was you. And because it wasn't placed with intent, it doesn't have the same structural anchor. It's not meant to be in you. It's holding on because it has nowhere else to go, not because it was designed to be there. Fester looked at him steadily. It can be moved. Not destroyed, moved. Extracted and then destroyed separately. The room was quiet for a moment. That's different from everything Dumbledore told me, Harry said carefully. Dumbledore was working from the standard literature, Wednesday said. Which assumes deliberate placement. He thought I had to die, Harry said. Flat. Not angry yet, just registering the shape of it. He thought the container had to be unmade, Morticia said from her position by the wall. Her voice was precise and without the edge Harry had expected. He was wrong about the type of container. It's an understandable error given the literature. A pause. It doesn't make it acceptable that he was moving you toward that conclusion without telling you, but the error itself is understandable. We should tell him, Hermione said. We will, Gomez said. Tomorrow. Tonight we need to finish the methodology, because the extraction isn't simple and there are several things that have to be in place before we attempt it. He nodded to Fester. Fester pulled a separate sheet to the top of the pile, clean, with diagrams drawn in his energetic hand, the shapes of magical field structures rendered in ink that had been pressed hard into the parchment. The extraction requires three things simultaneously. A drawing charm to pull the fragment toward the surface, not toward destruction, just toward the exterior of Harry's magical core. A separation barrier between the fragment and Harry's own soul, which is what the containment field is for. And a receiving vessel to capture the fragment after separation. What kind of vessel? Wednesday asked. Something dark enough to hold a soul fragment without being destabilized by it. He looked at Wednesday. I've been thinking about the trophy. Riddle's award. It already carries his resonance, it's already been used as a magical anchor. If we reverse the polarity of that anchor, it could receive rather than transmit. Wednesday considered this. Harry watched her think, the slight pause, the internal processing that he'd learned to recognize as substantive. The resonance is 50 years old. Fragmentary. A soul fragment going in would be like a lock finding a key it was made for, Fester said. The resonance is degraded, but it's the right signature. The fragment will recognize it. And then we destroy the trophy, Harry said. And then we destroy the trophy, Fester confirmed. With basilisk venom, Wednesday said. We have the fawn. Harry had brought it months ago, Hermione had read about it, and they'd been carrying it in the operations room since the second week. He'd barely thought about it as a practical resource. Wednesday had apparently been thinking about it the entire time. This is going to work, Hermione said, not as optimism but as conclusion, the tone of someone who has verified the mathematics. It's going to work, Fester agreed. It requires a week of preparation work in conditions I'll specify. And it needs to happen before we address the first curse, because the fragment and the curse have been coexisting for 15 years and they've created mutual dependencies. If we remove the fragment first, the first curse loses its anchor point and begins to decay naturally. He looked around the table. But this is the order: fragment extraction, then the simultaneous removal of 6 and 7, then the remaining curses in sequence, and the 14th last. What's the preparation work? Harry asked. 3 days of baseline work on your magical core, not invasive, but I need to map the exact boundaries between the fragment and your own soul so the drawing charm doesn't pull the wrong thing. Fester said this with the practicality of a surgeon describing preoperative procedure. And you need to eat properly and sleep properly for the next week, because your core needs to be as stable as possible going in. No stress responses. No unnecessary magical expenditure. That's going to be difficult, Harry said. I know, Fester said. Which is why we're doing it during a week where the Addams family will be managing all external threats. He smiled. You concentrate on sleeping. We'll concentrate on everything else. Harry looked at the table, at the notes, the diagrams, the work of two people who'd spent 4 days building a solution to a problem everyone else had spent 15 years treating as unsolvable. He felt something he hadn't expected to feel, the specific unsteadiness of hope when you're not used to having it. Not comfortable. But real. Okay, he said. Okay. The Death Eaters came the following Tuesday at 2 in the morning. Not 3 this time. 7. They operate to the edge of the Hogwarts grounds in a coordinated spread pattern, 3 at the north end, 2 at the south, 2 at the east, positioned to create overlapping fields of approach that would pin anyone responding to any one point while the others moved. Professional. Tactical. Someone had planned this with a real understanding of the school's external geography. Wednesday was awake. She was almost always awake at 2 in the morning, she slept less than most people and more lightly, and she developed the habit at Nevermore of sitting at her window between midnight and 3 working through the problems that required the particular clarity of isolated hours. Tonight she was doing exactly that, going over the fragment extraction diagrams, when she felt the perimeter disturbance. She didn't feel it through the castle wards, she felt it the way she felt everything, through the accumulated sensitivity of years of being trained by people who treated perception as a skill rather than a passive experience. A change in the quality of the darkness outside. A pressure that didn't belong to the night. She was at Pugsley's door in 30 seconds. 7, she said, when he opened it with the immediate alertness of someone who slept the same way she did. North, south, east spread. Coordinated. This isn't opportunistic, they planned the approach. Pugsley was already reaching for the components he kept on his desk. How long? They're moving now. 5 minutes to the castle walls. I'll get the twins. I'll get Harry. She was at Harry's dormitory, she'd identified the window configuration from outside weeks ago and verified the interior layout during a legitimate visit, in under 2 minutes, and she knocked on the door with the particular cadence they'd established as an alert signal during the second week, 3 fast and 1 slow. He opened the door in 7 seconds. He was awake. He'd been awake, she registered, dressed, wand in hand, eyes already sharp. I felt something, he said. 7 Death Eaters. Coordinated approach. Voldemort? Not present. This is an extraction squad, not an assault force. They want to take you, not kill you. She looked at him. Which means they'll prioritize capture spells over lethal ones. That's tactically useful. He looked at her with the expression she'd categorized during the first week as his processing face, the one where he was taking in new information and converting it to action. It was faster now than it had been in October. What's the plan? Don't let them separate us. She moved. Come on. They moved through the castle with the efficiency of people who'd been mapping it for weeks. Wednesday had memorized every corridor, shortcut, and structural feature. Harry knew it instinctively from 5 years of survival navigation. The combination was fast. Gomez was already in the entrance hall when they arrived. He was in a dark dressing gown and carrying a saber, which he held with the ease of someone who had never in his life felt that a weapon needed justifying. He looked entirely awake and entirely unbothered, the way he looked when something interesting had presented itself at an inconvenient hour. 7, he said, when he saw Wednesday. 7, she confirmed. North 3 are positioned to cut the path to Hogsmeade. They're trying to prevent outside assistance. He looked at Harry. Clever, but it assumes the help is coming from outside. Festus in the East Passage. Pugsley and the boys are taking the south approach. He glanced toward the main doors with the expression of someone checking a clock. The North 3 are the ones I'm going to enjoy most. I haven't had a proper fight in 6 weeks and my footwork is getting lazy. Gomez, Morticia said, descending the stairs in black robes with the same unruffled quality she had at every hour, her hair loose and dark against her shoulders. She was carrying a wand and what appeared to be a small ornate box that Harry recognized from the operations room as a containment device. The North 3 first, then redirect to support Fester if needed. Obviously, Kara. And don't be theatrical. I make no promises about that. Ron and Hermione arrived behind Morticia, both dressed and armed, Hermione with 3 books under one arm in the specific mode of someone who planned to solve problems through a combination of magic and research simultaneously. What do we do? Hermione asked. You and I go to the operations room, Wednesday said. I need the extraction equipment and the containment crystal ready in case any of them are carrying cursed objects. Harry, I'm not going to the operations room, Harry said. Wednesday looked at him. 7 Death Eaters in my school coming for me specifically, he said. Not defiant, just clear. I'm not going to sit in a room while other people handle it. She looked at him for a moment. Then, North. With my father. Don't get separated. Deal. And if you recognize any of them, tell me immediately. Why? Because the isolation curses caster might have sent this squad. If I can identify them in the field, we can address the anchor object tonight and break the 14th curse ahead of schedule. She looked at him steadily. So pay attention. Gomez was already at the main doors, saber held in the loose ready position of someone who'd been practicing since before most people's grandparents were born. He glanced over his shoulder at Harry with the grin of a man who was, genuinely, looking forward to this. Stay on my left. You have better range on your spell work and I need my right arm free. How do you know I have better range on my right? Wednesday's reports are thorough. He pushed the doors open. The night was cold and very clear, the stars the hard brilliant stars of a Scottish November, the grounds lit by moonlight that silvered the frost on the grass. 3 figures were moving from the north tree line toward the castle, dark robes, masks, wands drawn. They'd cast a silencing perimeter around themselves, standard professional approach, but the silencing perimeter had a gap on the downwind side that Gomez had clearly already identified, because he moved immediately to the upwind position with the certainty of someone reading terrain. Stop, Harry called to them. Clear, carrying in the cold air. The 3 figures stopped. The central one turned to face them. Potter, said the same voice as before, the central figure from the Tree-Line meeting 2 weeks ago. You're making this harder than, last time you gave me a message from Voldemort, Harry said. What's tonight's message? Tonight there's no message. The figure raised their wand. Tonight you come with us. That's not going to happen, Harry said. But I'll make you a deal. You can tell me who sent you, and then you can walk back to the Tree-Line, and then you can tell Voldemort that this approach failed. And I won't need to tell him why. Why would I? Because, Gomez said, from Harry's left, in a voice that had shed the warm sociability of his normal register and was carrying something older and quieter underneath, there are 3 of you and I've been watching your footwork since you crossed the 50-foot line, and 2 of you favor your left lead and the 3rd hasn't corrected for the frost on the grass and is going to have a balance problem in about 4 steps. He tilted his head very slightly. This is not a good engagement for you. The 3rd Death Eater took a step forward and their foot slipped on the frost-covered grass by almost exactly the amount Gomez had predicted. They corrected, but the correction was a second off, and in a second Gomez had already moved, not toward them but laterally, changing his angle, and the movement was so fluid and so fast that it seemed less like fighting and more like weather. The first curse from the leftmost figure, a binding hex, blue-white, aimed at Harry, crossed empty air because Harry had moved too, and he'd moved based on the same read of their positioning that Wednesday had been teaching him for weeks, the understanding that people telegraphed intent in their bodies before they acted on it. Harry sent back a disarming charm that wasn't aimed at the figure's wand hand but at their shoulder, because at this angle the shoulder was a better target and it achieved the same result, and the wand flew and clattered on the frost and the figure went down on one knee with the impact. Gomez was already at the second figure, and what happened in the next 4 seconds was something Harry would replay later with the specific attention he gave things he wanted to understand and eventually replicate. Gomez didn't use the saber to harm, he used it to dominate space, to force the figure's wand arm wide, to create an angle that made casting geometrically difficult, and when the figure tried to correct for the saber, Gomez's other hand was already moving, and the result was a containment jinx applied at contact range that wrapped the figure in a binding that Harry recognized from Wednesday's notes as one of Fester's methods. The 3rd figure, who still had their wand, cast at Gomez's back. Harry blocked it. The block came from the right reflex, the right read of trajectory and timing, and felt like something that had been practiced until it lived in his hands rather than his head. Nice, Gomez said, without turning around. 20 seconds later all 3 North Death Eaters were down. Gomez looked at them with the expression of someone who has completed a task and is already thinking about the next one. He was not remotely out of breath. Harry was breathing harder, the adrenaline, the cold, the speed of it. The central one, Harry said, looking at the figure he'd disarmed. Something. A detail. The way they'd turned when he spoke. The specific quality of their stillness when he'd said isolation curse 2 weeks ago, and the way they'd reached for their left hip. He crouched in front of the figure and looked at the mask and then at the hands. Left hand. Dominant left. The same figure from the Tree-Line, the curse caster, the one with the elegant work, the one Wednesday had identified from a 2-second micro-response to the right words. "I know who you are," Harry said. The figure behind the mask went very still. "I don't know your name yet," he said. "But Wednesday has your magical signature. She has the anchor object. And she's going to break the 14th curse this week regardless, so the surveillance is ending either way." He looked at the still figure. "But if you tell me who sent you specifically, not Voldemort generally, the specific person who planned tonight's approach, I'll give you the courtesy of a head start before I file the signature documentation." Silence. Then the masked figure said, very quietly, "Rookwood. Augustus Rookwood. He planned the approach." A pause. "He's the one who placed the 14th curse." Harry stood up. "Thank you," he said. He sent a stunning spell into the figure before they could react to their own confession, and the figure dropped neatly onto the frosted grass. He heard the sounds from the south and east ending, the specific silence that fell after a fight concluded, different from the silence before. He heard Fester's voice carrying in the cold, something about an inefficient binding technique, offered as constructive feedback to what Harry assumed was a now incapacitated Death Eater. He heard the twins somewhere, though not what they were saying, and then Pugsley's flat assessment, 8.3-second deployment, which is under the target time, so the temperature calibration is working. Gomez put a hand on Harry's shoulder. "Rookwood," he said. "You heard. I hear everything when it matters." He looked across the grounds at the East Passage where the sounds had been. "I know that name. He was a Death Eater who gave intelligence to Voldemort from inside the Department of Mysteries. Cleared after the First War. Apparently not reformed." He was quiet for a moment. "He knows this school. He would have had access during his own education, he would know about Riddle's Award, the trophy room's magical architecture. He trained the woman in the portrait," Harry said. "Elladora Black. Umbridge trained under Elladora. Rookwood trained under someone who knew Elladora. He was working through it, the chain of it. He built the surveillance system using the school's existing dark history. The portrait, the trophy, the isolation curse, it's one interconnected structure. And now it's coming apart," Gomez said. "Because of Wednesday. Because of Wednesday, yes." He said it with the warmth of a man whose daughter has done exactly what he'd hoped she'd do. She finds problems and she solves them. She always has. He looked at Harry. What she's less practiced at is letting something matter to her. Other than the problem. He wasn't performing the observation, he was simply making it, the same way he made all his observations, with complete openness. "You're good for that." Harry didn't know what to do with that, so he said, "I don't think I do anything." "She does everything." "You let her," Gomez said. "That's the part she needed. Someone who lets her do what she does without making it smaller." He squeezed Harry's shoulder once. "Come. We should secure these 7 and get the information to Dumbledore before morning." Wednesday met them coming back from the East Passage, with Fester and Pugsley and the twins, all of them varying degrees of windswept and energized. Fred had a scorch mark on his sleeve that suggested the variable dispersal prototype had been deployed and had performed well. George had the expression of someone mentally filing operational data. Pugsley was recapping Aristotle back into the duffel with the practiced ease of someone redirecting an asset after a mission. Wednesday looked at Harry first. A quick scan, physical assessment, the kind she did automatically. Satisfied by what she found. "Rookwood," Harry said. Her eyes sharpened. "You got the name. From the central figure. He planned the approach and placed the 14th curse." He paused. "He built the whole system, the portrait, the trophy, the curse. It's one structure. Then when we break the 14th curse," she said, thinking aloud, "the whole structure goes. The portrait relay loses its handler. The trophy's residual anchor collapses." Her eyes moved as she traced the implications. "We should break the 14th curse tomorrow. Not Thursday. Tomorrow. Is that enough preparation time for you? I'll make it enough. She looked at him steadily. You got the name in a field engagement with 3 active Death Eaters while fighting alongside someone you've known for 3 weeks. That's not nothing. Your father did most of the work. He was keeping your left clear. You handled the right and the back. She paused. I watched from the window. He looked up at the castle, the 3rd-floor window of the corridor near the operations room, where a pale face would have been visible from the grounds if he'd been looking. You watched. I was monitoring the tactical situation. You were watching. Something moved in her face, brief and controlled. The monitoring and the watching were simultaneous events, she said, and turned toward the castle doors before he could respond to that, which he thought was deliberate but couldn't prove. Fester fell into step with Harry as they followed her in. She watched the whole time, he said, very quietly. I know, Harry said. She's going to pretend she was just monitoring. I know. Let her. He smiled. It'll resolve itself. Dumbledore was waiting in the entrance hall, fully dressed at 2:40 in the morning, which suggested he'd been awake since before the incursion or had been alerted by the castle's own awareness. He looked at the assembled group, windswept, sharp-eyed, 7 incapacitated Death Eaters being levitated behind them in a neat row, with the expression of a man recalibrating rapidly. The Ministry will need to collect them, Gomez said. I'd recommend Kingsley Shacklebolt if you want someone reliable. Dawlish is competent but recently reminded of certain institutional pressures. Dumbledore looked at the 7 figures. All 7. All 7. The central one in the North group is Rookwood's associate and gave us Rookwood's name directly. The others may or may not be aware of Rookwood's specific role, but they're all active and they all came for Harry. Gomez's tone was pleasant and matter-of-fact. We should also discuss the portrait this morning. Elidora Black needs to be isolated from the portrait network tonight, before Rookwood gets wind of this and has her relay a warning. Dumbledore looked at Wednesday. Can you, already done, she said. I placed a containment field on her portrait before I came downstairs. She can still move within the portrait but she can't communicate to the network. She paused. She knows she's contained. She's been pretending to sleep. She's actually quite frustrated. Dumbledore blinked. Then, quietly, thank you, Wednesday. She accepted this with a nod. Albus, Gomez said, and his voice had the note it carried when he was going to say something that required being heard clearly. We need to talk about the extraction research. Tomorrow morning. Early. He looked at the headmaster steadily, and the warmth was still there but so was the clarity, the thing underneath that was the actual Gomez, the man who had lived 60+ years without ever becoming comfortable with the easy answer when the right one was available. Fester and Miss Granger have found something important. About Harry's specific situation. About what you believed would be necessary. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. His eyes traveled to Harry, and in them Harry saw the thing he'd sometimes glimpsed and always had to work to read, regret, the genuine kind, the kind that wasn't performance. I see, he said. We'll talk in the morning, Gomez said. Tonight, let's get these 7 secured and make sure the children sleep. I'm not a child, Wednesday said. Of course not, Gomez said, with the automatic ease of someone who has been saying this to his daughter for years and finds it an entirely reasonable position. I meant the Weasleys. Hey, Ron said. And Hermione. Hermione opened her mouth and then appeared to decide that objecting to being lumped with Ron was a different battle than the one she needed to be fighting tonight. The letter was written the following morning. Gomez wrote it himself, at the desk in the operations room, in the upright energetic script that always looked like it was going somewhere. He wrote it on heavy black paper with deep red ink. The Addams family maintained a small supply of both for specific correspondences, the kind that required a presentation commensurate with the seriousness of the content, and he wrote in the practiced hand of someone who had been composing formal documents for decades. Wednesday stood beside him while he wrote. Harry stood behind her. The letter was, Gomez had said over breakfast, going to be a formal declaration, and Wednesday had agreed this was the appropriate escalation, and Harry had asked if they were really doing this and Wednesday had said yes, Harry, we are, and Harry had said okay with the tone of someone who was finding that okay covered significantly more ground than it used to. The letter read, to Tom Riddle, who calls himself Lord Voldemort, the Addams family has become aware of your ongoing campaign against Harry Potter, including 14 active curses, 1 soul fragment, 1 portrait intelligence relay, 1 trophy-based monitoring anchor, 1 isolation curse designed to prevent him from maintaining meaningful alliances, and 7 Death Eaters sent to retrieve him from our care on Tuesday night. All of these have been addressed or are in the process of being addressed. You have been operating on several assumptions that are no longer accurate. The first is that Harry Potter is isolated and manageable. He isn't. The second is that the people around him will eventually be persuaded or coerced to step aside. We won't. The third is that your approach, the systematic, patient erosion of a person's capacity to fight back by removing everything they have to fight for, is something we haven't seen before. We have. It's the approach of a man who is afraid of what happens in a fair fight. We are the Addams family. We have been acquainted with death our entire lives, and we find it considerably less frightening than you do. This is, we think, your primary strategic miscalculation. This is formal notice that the Addams family is engaged in this conflict, on Harry Potter's side, without reservation or condition. We look forward to meeting you properly. Yours, with complete sincerity, Gomez Addams on behalf of, Morticia Addams, Wednesday Addams, Pugsley Addams, Fester Addams, and associated family members too numerous to list individually. He signed it with a signature that was 3 inches tall and unmistakably meant. The blood? Wednesday asked. Traditional, Gomez said. A declaration of war delivered without blood is just a strongly worded letter. He produced a small knife from his coat pocket, made a precise cut on his right palm, pressed his hand flat against the bottom of the parchment, and lifted it cleanly. The handprint was dark and clear. Kara. Morticia, from across the room where she'd been reading something, looked up, crossed to the desk, and placed her own handprint beside his without being asked, with the naturalness of someone completing a thing that was obviously a joint action. Wednesday looked at the letter for a moment. Then she added her own, smaller, precise, position to the right of her mother's with the same exact pressure. Pugsley, who had come in at some point without Harry noticing, placed his on the other side of Gomez's. Fester, with the careful deliberateness of someone who understood the weight of what he was signing, added his at the bottom. Harry looked at the 5 dark prints on the black parchment. You don't have to, Wednesday said, without looking at him. He looked at the knife on the desk. He thought about 15 years of curses. He thought about the cupboard under the stairs. He thought about a prophecy that nobody had told him until they needed him to be ready to die for it. He thought about Tuesday night on the frosted grass, standing on Gomez's left, and how it had felt to have someone covering his blind side who meant it. He picked up the knife. He made the cut, clean, not flinching, because Wednesday had looked at 14 curses on him and not flinched, and he could manage this, and he pressed his hand to the parchment below all the others. 6 prints. 5 Addamses and 1 Potter. Good, Gomez said, with quiet warmth. The letter was delivered to Voldemort's known contact point, the Death Eater communication network, via a method Fester had developed that required significant explanation and produced a small but satisfying explosion when the connection was made, at noon on Wednesday. By Wednesday afternoon, through channels the Order of the Phoenix monitored, there was intelligence that Voldemort had received the letter and that his response had been, in the summary of the Order member who'd intercepted the intelligence, something between fury and a re-evaluation. Re-evaluation, Morticia said, when she heard this, was the most dangerous thing they could have induced. Because he'll be more careful? Ron asked. Because he'll be more direct, she said. He's been managing Harry at a distance through proxies and structures. The moment someone forces you out of your management posture into directness, you lose the distance that gives you safety. She looked at the intelligence summary on the table. He's going to come himself. Sooner than he would have. That's bad, Ron said. It means the timeline is moved up, she said. The extraction needs to happen faster. Wednesday, Fester said, looking at his niece. Can you do it tomorrow? I can do it tonight, she said. Wednesday, Fester said, with the tone of someone who has learned to take her at her word and also verify the practical implications. Your preparation is done. I finished the core mapping this morning. She looked at Fester. The delay was always a precautionary buffer. If the timeline has moved up, the buffer goes. Fester looked at Morticia. Morticia looked at Wednesday. Wednesday did not alter her expression. Tonight, Morticia said. Tonight, Wednesday confirmed. Harry had been listening to this and now he said, steadily, all right. Tonight. And they began to prepare. By 8 that evening the operations room had been transformed, furniture against the walls, the floor cleared, containment crystals at the 4 cardinal points, Fester's extraction device at the center, Riddle's trophy positioned in its receiving configuration. Hermione had triple-checked the calculations. Pugsley had verified the containment crystal calibration twice and was doing it a third time with the focused thoroughness of someone who knew the difference between careful and overcautious. The twins were in the corridor outside, not excluded but positioned, because Fred and George Weasley in a room where something might go wrong were an excellent tactical reserve. Gomez stood by the wall with Morticia. Ron was by the door. Hermione was at the table with the containment field notes, ready to provide real-time calculation support. Wednesday stood in the center of the cleared floor. Harry walked in from the corridor and looked at the room and then at Wednesday, and Wednesday looked back at him with the same clarity she'd had on the first morning, the winter-lake gray of her eyes, the precision of her attention. Sit down in the center, she said. Cross-legged is best for core stability. She paused. How are you feeling? He sat down. Honestly? Like I'm about to have a piece of someone else's soul removed from my head, which is accurate and strange. Yes. It will feel like that. She sat across from him, close, the 3 inches of working distance she'd used for the third curse removal. The drawing charm will feel like pressure. When the fragment begins to separate, you'll feel it as cold, sharper than the pressure, brief. When it moves into the vessel, you'll feel a release. Like a breath. She looked at him. The whole process is approximately 4 minutes. Don't try to help or resist. Just hold still and tell me if the cold gets too sharp. How sharp is too sharp? You'll know. A pause. I'll know. He nodded. She raised her hands to the working position, 3 inches from his temples, not touching. Harry, she said. Yeah. When this is finished and the 14th curse is gone as well, she paused. Things will feel different. The isolation effect will end. The people around you will feel closer and you'll feel more available to them. She kept her eyes on what she was doing. Don't be alarmed by that. I won't be, he said. And don't make any major decisions in the first week. The recalibration is real. Wednesday. I know what I'm going to feel when it's gone. He looked at her steadily, and she was close enough that she couldn't not meet his eyes. I've known for a while. The curse didn't change that. It just made it harder to act on. Her hands, 3 inches from his temples, were absolutely still. That was perhaps not the right time to say that, he said. No, she said. It was exactly the right time. Her voice was even. Her hands didn't move. Now be quiet. I'm working. He was quiet. She worked. The room held its breath. Outside, in the corridor, Fred leaned toward George and said, very quietly, "Is it, shoo?" George said. But, shoo. And then from inside the room there was a sound like a held note releasing, and a brief white light under the door, and then silence. And then Fester's voice, warm and certain, "There. That's it. Well done." Chapter 6, 14 Curses, 14 Solutions. Harry sat in the center of the cleared floor and felt the absence of a thing he'd carried his entire life. It wasn't dramatic. That was the first thing he noticed. There was no explosion, no revelation, no light show. Just a feeling like a room with a piece of furniture that had always been there suddenly empty, and the emptiness wasn't hollow. It was just space. Clean space that had always been his and hadn't known it. He became aware that he'd been crying at some point during the process, which was news to him. Not sobbing, just wet tracks on his face, the passive kind, the kind that happened without permission. He raised a hand and wiped his cheek and looked at the moisture on his fingers with the slightly dazed attention of someone cataloging their own body after something large had happened to it. Wednesday was still across from him, hands in her lap now. Her eyes were on him with the careful attention of a doctor in the immediate post-operative moment, scanning, assessing, her expression the focused neutral of someone whose professional concern was currently louder than everything else. "How do you feel?" she said. He thought about the question honestly. "Lighter," he said. I know that sounds, no. That's accurate. The fragment had mass. Not physical mass, but magical mass. You've been compensating for the weight of it your entire life. She reached out and pressed 2 fingers to his left wrist, feeling the pulse of his magical core the way you check someone's heartbeat. Your core is stable. Better than stable, it's already starting to recalibrate toward its natural baseline. She released his wrist and sat back. The cold you felt at the end? Sharp. Like you said. He paused. For about 2 seconds it was, I think I felt him. Briefly. The fragment's awareness. She said it without drama. It was a piece of a soul. It would have residual experience attached to it. That's normal. He was terrified, Harry said. Whatever I felt, it was terror. Complete and consuming. The room was very quiet. Voldemort's fragment, Morticia said from the wall, her voice thoughtful, experiencing the moment of extraction. Experiencing the moment it was separated from him again, Fester said quietly. He was standing over Riddle's trophy, which now sat in its containment field with a quality of wrongness about it that was palpable even across the room, a darkness that pressed against the crystal boundary, agitated, unresolved. It's in the vessel. The trophy is fully occupied. He looked at the group. We should destroy it tonight. We should, Gomez agreed. He picked up the basilisk fong from the equipment table, weighing it in his palm. He looked at Harry. Your call. Harry stood up. His legs were steady. He crossed the room to Gomez, took the fong from his hands. It was heavier than he remembered from second year, or perhaps he was just more aware of what he was holding, and looked at the trophy in its containment field. Tom Riddle's Special Services Award. A piece of bronze that had spent 50 years in a trophy case accumulating the quiet malevolence of its owner's residue, and the last several hours receiving something worse than residue. He looked at it and felt nothing sentimental. Just the clean, purposeful clarity of completing something. He drove the fong into the trophy. The destruction was total and immediate, a sound like a screen compressed into half a second and then cut off, the trophy crumbling into fragments that glowed briefly with the sickly light of something trying to persist past the point of its own destruction and failing, and then just metal shards in a containment field, inert, dark. Harry straightened up. His hands were completely steady. First curse, Wednesday said. Addressed. How many does that leave? Ron said. 13, Harry said. But Fester said the fragment was acting as a stabilizer for the first curse, the rebounded killing curse. Without the fragment, the first curse should, already decaying, Wednesday said, her eyes moving across the space she read as clearly as other people read text. The first curse has lost its anchor. It'll be fully gone within 48 hours. We don't have to touch it. She looked at her uncle. That's 2. 2 down, Fester confirmed, with the quiet satisfaction of a man completing work he believed in. 12 to go. "12's a better number than 14, Pugsley said from the corner. "All numbers improve when they get smaller," Fred said. "Philosophically sound," George agreed. They destroyed the containment field, cleaned the room, and then they sat, all of them, on the floor, against the walls, wherever there was space, and Morticia produced food from somewhere with the mysterious abundance that the Addams family seemed to maintain as a matter of principle, cold chicken and good bread and the particular tea that Fester made from components he wouldn't specify, which tasted of smoke and honey and something Wednesday had once told Harry was probably better not to identify. They ate and talked in the easy way of people who just finished something hard together, the specific warm exhaustion of shared effort, and Harry sat with his back against the wall and his tea in his hands and felt the recalibration Wednesday had warned him about beginning to happen. It was subtle. The room felt closer. Not smaller, closer. The people in it had a different texture, like a piece of music you'd been hearing through a wall suddenly playing in the same room, the same notes but the full resonance of them finally reaching you. He looked at Ron eating bread across the room with the unself-conscious comfort of someone who'd eaten in this room 100 times, and felt the full weight of 5 years of friendship like a hand on his back, steady in there. He looked at Hermione, still holding a piece of parchment because Hermione took 10 minutes after any intellectual event to fully disengage from it, discussing something with Fester in the low animated voice of two people sharing a private professional frequency, and felt something that was specifically about Hermione, the loyalty of her. The brilliant inflexible loyalty that had never once in 5 years been more than 12 steps away from him, and which he'd felt at a distance through the curse like music through a wall. He looked at Gomez and Morticia, sitting together against the far wall with the ease of two people who had been in 100 rooms like this and always found each other in them, Gomez saying something that made Morticia tilt her chin the way she did when she was genuinely amused. He looked at Fester, at Pugsley, at the twins, at this impossible family that had arrived in his life 3 weeks ago and treated him with the specific, uncomplicating directness of people who decided he was worth their full commitment and didn't need to perform the deciding. He looked at Wednesday. She was looking at him. She'd been watching the recalibration happen with the same clinical attention she gave all processes, but underneath it was something else, something she wasn't performing, just experiencing, and hadn't yet decided what to do with. He held her gaze. She held it back. "The 6th and 7th curses tomorrow," she said. "Early morning. The containment field needs to be set before the castle magic peaks at noon." "Okay," he said. "Sleep tonight. Properly." "I will." She looked at him for one more moment and then looked away, back to her tea, and if Gomez caught Harry's eye across the room with the specific expression of a man who found life magnificent in all its forms, Harry chose not to acknowledge it, and Gomez chose not to press it, and both of them were quietly correct about the timing. The 6th and 7th curses came down simultaneously the next morning in a process that was more complicated and more physical than the fragment extraction and involved Harry actively holding the containment field for the first time in a real application rather than a practice session. He held it. Not easily, it required the kind of focused sustained effort that he associated with a long Quidditch match in bad weather, the concentration that had to stay alive for the full duration without flagging, but he held it cleanly, and when Wednesday said release at the end of 11 minutes his hands were shaking slightly and his teeth were clenched but the field had held, and the 2 curses came out in a discharge that Fester caught in a prepared absorption crystal with the expert timing of someone who had done this many times. "Good," Wednesday said, with the flat precision of a person calibrating a result against an expected benchmark and finding it met. She looked at his shaking hands. "That's expected. It'll settle in a few minutes." "I know," he said. "You held the asymmetric edge when it tried to migrate left, which was the most difficult part. Most people lose it there. You told me it would try to migrate left. I tell people lots of things. They don't always execute them under pressure." She looked at him steadily. "You did." His hands stopped shaking. "4 down. 10 to go." The remaining 10 came down over the next 6 days in a rhythm that began to feel, by the 4th day, almost methodical, not routine, because none of them were routine, each one requiring its own specific preparation and its own specific approach, but rhythmic in the sense that the group had found its working pattern and was moving inside it with the ease of practice. Wednesday led each removal. Fester supported the technical side, particularly on the 3 curses that required secondary containment. Hermione ran theoretical backup, cross-checking removal methodology in real time with the focused precision that Wednesday had called formidable and Harry privately thought was one of the most useful things he'd ever seen. Pugsley managed equipment and materials with a quiet efficiency that never called attention to itself. Gomez and Morticia were present for every session without needing to be asked, positioned where they were useful, available when they were needed. Ron was present for every session too, which Harry noticed and appreciated in the specific way you appreciate constancy when you've had occasion to notice its absence. The 10th curse, the one that smelled of Azkaban, the Dementor impression, the cold mark, required something different from the others. It wasn't a standard curse with a standard removal. It was a soul impression, a psychic scar from sustained Dementor exposure, and the technical approach didn't work on it the way it worked on the structural curses. Fester spent 2 days on it. He and Hermione went through everything in the restricted section. He wrote 3 letters to colleagues in Europe and received urgent responses. He sat in the operations room late on the second night with his notes spread around him and the expression of someone who was close but not quite there. Wednesday came in at midnight and sat across from him. "I know what it needs," she said. He looked at her. "It's not a technical removal. It's a Patronus-based extraction. The Patronus charm produces a light-based magic that's specifically antithetical to Dementor impression residue." She set down her pen. "The problem is the Patronus has to come from Harry, not from a practitioner, because the impression is keyed to his specific magical signature. No one else's Patronus will touch it." Fester considered this. "His Patronus is a stag," she said. "Powerful one. He produced it at 13 against 100 Dementors. He hasn't cast it recently." "No. He's been managing his core for the extraction work. His output has been limited." She paused. "I'll ask him tomorrow." "Wednesday." She looked at him. "You're not asking him because it's a technical requirement," Fester said, with the gentle precision of a man who loved his niece well enough to be accurate with her. "You're asking him because you know what the Dementor impression contains. What it represents for him." She was quiet. "His worst memories," Fester said. "That's what Dementor impressions retain. The psychic residue clusters around the most painful experiences. For him, that's extensive." "I know," she said. "Asking him to produce a Patronus means asking him to find something strong enough to overcome all of that. In front of people. He's done it before. Not with you watching." She was quiet for longer this time. "That's not, it is," Fester said, not unkindly. "It is, Wednesday. And that's fine. It's a good thing." He reached across the table and patted her hand once with the unsentimental warmth of someone who knew exactly how much contact she'd accept and offered exactly that. "Ask him. He'll say yes." She asked him the next morning. She presented the technical case first, what the impression was, why standard removal didn't work, why it required the Patronus specifically, and then she said, flatly and without prelude, "It's going to surface your worst memories. Functionally, you'll re-experience them briefly as the impression releases. I can't prevent that part. I'm sorry." Harry was quiet for a moment. "How long is briefly?" 20 seconds. Possibly less. He looked at her. "Wednesday. I've been re-experiencing my worst memories since I was 1 year old. The difference is this time it ends." She held his gaze. Something moved in hers, brief and sincere. "Yes. This time it ends. Let's do it tonight," he said. That evening, in the cleared operations room, Harry cast the Patronus charm. He cast it the way he'd always cast it, by finding the thing strong enough to override everything else. This time it wasn't a single memory. He found instead the thing that had changed in the last 3 weeks, the weight of people at his back, present and chosen in choosing him. He found Wednesday identifying 14 curses at breakfast with the flat precision of someone who considered his survival non-negotiable. He found Gomez on his left in the frost. He found Fester saying ugly education is still education and meaning it. He found his bloodied handprint on black parchment next to 5 others. The stag erupted from his wand with a brightness that lit the room completely, and it ran a circle around Harry, and the Dementor impression came off him like frost off glass in sunlight, fast, clean, and final. 20 seconds. Then light. Then silence. Then his own breathing. Wednesday was watching him with her hands clasped in her lap and her eyes very bright, and she said nothing for a long moment. Then, 11. 11 down, he said. 3 to go. The 12th and 13th were the quietest of all the removals, older hexes, faded to near inertness, requiring more patience than skill. Wednesday worked them out over the course of a single afternoon with the focused calm of someone doing detailed work, and Harry sat still for 3 hours and let her, and by the time she withdrew her hands for the last time the November afternoon had gone grey dark outside and someone had lit candles in the operations room and the light was warm. 13, she said. 13, he confirmed. She sat back on her heels on the floor, and for the first time since October she looked tired, not defeated, not discouraged, just the honest physical tiredness of someone who had spent 6 days doing difficult sustained work. She'd earned it. He thought that was worth saying. You should rest tonight, he said. She looked at him. Tomorrow is the 14th. Which is why you should rest tonight. She held the look for a moment, then let it go, which was something he'd noticed she was starting to do, the gradual lessening of the effort she spent on maintaining her expression as a controlled surface, not replacement with something unguarded but a reduction in the active management. He found it, the right word was something, he hadn't arrived at anything more precise than that, and he suspected he was going to have to arrive at it soon. All right, she said. Tonight. She stood up, and he stood up, and they were close in the candlelit room in a way that had become natural over the last month and that neither of them had formally acknowledged, the particular comfortable proximity of 2 people who had been working in each other's space long enough to calibrate to it. Wednesday, he said. Tomorrow, after the 14th curse is gone. He said it carefully because he'd been thinking about how to say it correctly, which meant not overstating it and not understating it either. I'm going to say something to you. I want you to be prepared. She looked at him with the complete attention she gave things that mattered. What kind of something? The honest kind. A pause. I see. Is that, I'll be prepared, she said. And she left the room with the same measured pace she'd always walked at, and he stayed in the candlelight for a moment after she'd gone, feeling the 13 absences where 13 curses used to be, and the single remaining presence of the 14th, and underneath it all, steadier than it had ever been, the irreducible fact of himself. Voldemort came on a Thursday. They'd known he was coming. The Order intelligence had been building for 2 days, movement in the Death Eater network, the particular preparation that Kingsley, who'd been in contact with Gomez since Tuesday, had described as mobilization rather than tactical action, which meant Voldemort himself, not a squad. The morning of the 14th curse removal arrived cold and clear, and by 7 the operations room had been reconfigured for the last time, everyone in position, everyone present, the work of the last month converging on this final application. The 14th curse was different from the others in a way Wednesday had always understood and now felt with particular clarity. It wasn't just a dark magic structure sitting on Harry's core. It was a living thing, fed by Rookwood's continued intent, anchored to his will. Rookwood was in ministry custody. The Order had collected him 3 days after the Tuesday incursion, acting on the name Harry had pulled from the masked figure in the frost, but the curse he'd built had been running for 8 months on its own accumulated momentum, and even without Rookwood actively feeding it, it had weight. The removal required something different. Not a drawing charm. Not a Patronus. Something relational. Wednesday had worked it out on the 4th night after they'd identified the 14th curse, and she'd kept the methodology to herself because it required something she wasn't sure she could ask for, and then she decided that was the wrong way to approach it and told herself so with the same flat honesty she applied to everything. She told Harry the morning of. The 14th curse responds to connection, she said. They were alone in the operations room before the others arrived, early morning, the castle still quiet. That's what it was designed to disrupt. The removal requires the opposite, a sustained act of genuine connection that the curse structure can't integrate. It has to find something it can't influence and fail against it. He looked at her. What does that mean, practically? It means the person removing it has to mean it, she said. Not perform meaning it. Actually mean it. She looked at him with the same clear winter lake gray she'd had on the first morning. I've been meaning it since approximately the second week. He was quiet. I'm telling you this as a technical disclosure, she said. You need to know the mechanism of the removal so you can participate in it correctly. Wednesday. The mechanism requires that the connection be mutual, Wednesday. Which means you also, I know, he said. I told you last night I was going to say something honest. She stopped. I don't need to wait until after the removal, he said. I've been meaning it since the second week too. Probably before. I don't know exactly when it started. He looked at her steadily. Is that the honest thing you needed? She held his gaze for a long moment. Yes, she said. She didn't look away. Neither did he. The space between them, which had been 3 inches in working proximity and had been slowly, incrementally, over 5 weeks narrowing in every other context, wasn't 3 inches anymore. She didn't move toward him and he didn't move toward her, but something concluded, the quiet arrival of a thing that had been traveling for a while and had reached its destination, not with fanfare but with the simple fact of being there. All right, she said. Good. That's established. That's established, he confirmed. We can discuss what it means after today. We can. Because there's still a curse to remove and Voldemort is, on his way. I know. He looked at her. Wednesday. For what it's worth. You're the most, he paused, choosing the word correctly. You're the most present person I've ever met. In my entire life. And I didn't know until you showed up how much I'd been standing in a room where nobody was fully present. She was quiet for 4 seconds. That's the most, she paused. That's a good thing to say. Good, he said. Don't make me say that again. I won't. The others arrived. The room filled. The 14th curse removal began. It was the simplest of all of them, technically. Wednesday placed her hands in the working position, 3 inches from his temples, and she didn't do anything complicated or structured or requiring sustained precision. She simply held the position, and she meant it, and Harry held her gaze the way he'd learned to hold containment fields, with sustained attention that didn't flag, and he meant it too. The 14th curse lasted 40 seconds. It came off like a weight rather than an extraction, not pulled out but simply surrendered, the way a fist opens when it finally gives up holding on. The magical structure of it collapsed from the inside, the isolation engineering unwinding, the long patient architecture of Rookwood's design failing against the thing it was least equipped to handle, 2 people being fully, genuinely present with each other with complete intent. When it was gone, Harry exhaled. Wednesday lowered her hands. The room was completely quiet. 14, she said. He looked at her. Something in his face had changed in the 40 seconds, the last residue of the chronic distance, the careful management of closeness that had been engineered into him before he'd been old enough to resist it. Gone. Not replaced by recklessness or excess, just gone, leaving room for whatever he actually was, which was, direct, and clear, and present. 14, he said. Gomez made a sound that had no word attached to it but which meant, everyone in the room understood, something warm and complete. Morticia's hand found his and he took it. Ron said something under his breath that was probably not suitable for the occasion but was honest. Hermione had tears on her face and made no effort to wipe them. Fester was smiling the round warm smile of a man who has done the thing he came to do. Pugsley looked at his sister and then at Harry and then at his sister again, and said nothing, which was exactly right. Voldemort arrived at noon. He didn't announce himself. He didn't send Death Eaters first or have his presence preceded by theatrics or dramatic weather, because the letter Gomez had sent had apparently produced the re-evaluation Morticia had predicted, and the re-evaluation had stripped away some of the performance that usually surrounded him. He appeared at the edge of the grounds in the cold noon light with 3 Death Eaters flanking him and the particular quality of presence that Harry had always experienced as terror and now experienced as something different. Something more honest. A man who was afraid. They met him on the grounds, all of them, because Wednesday had said all of us and Gomez had agreed and Harry hadn't argued, and Harry looked at Voldemort across the frosted grass and felt the absence of the bond that had connected them since he was 1 year old. The fragment was gone. The rebounded curse residue was decaying. The connection was severing at its root, and Voldemort, Harry could see it on the white, ruined face, in the red eyes, could feel it too. The Horcrux is gone, Voldemort said. His voice was what Harry had always remembered, cold and carrying and accustomed to having no answer offered to it. But today there was something in it. A frequency that didn't belong to confidence. Yes, Harry said. That's not possible. Wednesday figured it out. He said it simply. Not as provocation, just fact. You placed it accidentally. Accidental placement doesn't require destruction of the container. It just requires relocation. The red eyes moved to Wednesday. Wednesday looked back at him. Voldemort, who had spent 70 years making people unable to hold his gaze, looked at Wednesday Addams and encountered a person who was not afraid of him, not impressed by him, not destabilized by his presence. She looked at him with the same clear attention she gave everything, reading him, cataloging him, arriving at her conclusions, and in her eyes he saw the thing he'd been avoiding his entire ruined life, the accurate assessment of what he actually was. You're afraid of death, she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was an identification, delivered in the flat, certain voice she used for classifications. A naturalist naming a specimen. Something moved in Voldemort's face. Your entire strategy, she said, is built on that fear. The Horcruxes, the Death Eaters, the prophecy, the 14 curses, all of it is about not dying. All of it is about controlling the thing you can't control. She tilted her head slightly. We find death interesting. We've always found it interesting. We're not afraid of it because we've never pretended it isn't real. She paused. You've spent your whole life pretending it isn't coming, and it has made you weak. Not powerful. Weak. The 3 Death Eaters behind Voldemort had gone very still. Voldemort raised his wand. Harry raised his. And then Gomez stepped forward to Harry's left, and Morticia to his right, and Fester was a step behind, and the twins flanked further out, and Pugsley was there, and Ron and Hermione beyond them, and Wednesday was at Harry's shoulder, and the formation was simply, present. Not threatening. Not performing. Present, the way the Addams family was always present, completely, without reserve, without the protective distance that most people maintained between themselves and things that mattered. Voldemort looked at them. He looked at Harry surrounded by people who were standing with him not for strategy or prophecy or the greater good but for the simple, intractable reason that they had decided he was worth standing with, and that decision had no conditions attached to it. The re-evaluation that Morticia had predicted was visible. Harry could see it happening, the recalculation, the model updating, the specific discovery of a variable that hadn't been in the equation. A boy with no one was manageable. A boy with the Addams family at his back was something else. This isn't over, Voldemort said. No, Harry said. It isn't. But the terms have changed. He held the red gaze steadily. You came here because the letter told you to come here. You came because you needed to see whether it was real. He gestured fractionally at the people around him. It's real. Voldemort looked at him for a long moment, and in the long moment Harry saw, very briefly, very clearly, what Wednesday had seen. The fear, immense and architectural, the skeleton of every terrible choice he'd made, and underneath it, almost inaccessible under the ruin of 70 years of its avoidance, something that might once have been a person. Then the moment closed. Voldemort lowered his wand. He turned and walked away across the frosted grounds toward the Treeline, and the 3 Death Eaters followed him, and the morning absorbed them. Everyone exhaled. "He'll come back," Hermione said, because Hermione said what was true. "He'll come back," Morticia agreed. "But differently. He's working from different information now." "We'll be ready," Gomez said, with the warmth of someone who means it as a promise rather than a platitude. Harry looked at the Treeline where Voldemort had disappeared, and he felt, not victory, it wasn't a victory, the war was still there and would need to be fought and the fighting would be real, but something accurate. A shift in the foundation. The difference between fighting from a deficit and fighting from ground. He felt Wednesday beside him and he didn't look at her immediately, both of them looking at the Treeline in the cold noon light, and it was a full 30 seconds before he turned. She was already looking at him. 14 curses, she said. 14 solutions, he said. She held his gaze with the same clarity she'd had on the first morning in the Great Hall, when she told him about 14 curses with the tone of someone who found the problem more interesting than frightening, and he held hers, and this time neither of them looked away. "I told you I was going to say something honest," he said. "After the 14th curse was gone," she said. Those were the terms. "The 14th curse is gone." "Yes," she said. "It is." He closed the remaining distance between them, not 3 inches, not the working distance, the actual distance, and he said, quietly, with the simple directness he'd learned from watching her, "You found me with 14 curses on me and you decided I was worth solving. I want you to know I think that's the bravest and best thing anyone's ever done for me." She looked at him for a moment. "I want you to know," she said, "that I didn't solve you. You were never broken." She paused. "I just removed what was in the way." "Wednesday." "I'm going to, yes," she said. "You are." He kissed her, and she let him, and behind them at a discreet distance Gomez Addams made the sound he made when he found something magnificent and Morticia's elbow found his ribs with the precise force of someone who has lived with a person long enough to know exactly how much force is needed, and Fester looked at the sky with the serene satisfaction of a man whose work is done, and Pugsley said to the twins, "I told you the second week." "You owe me 5 galleons, Fred said to George. "I don't remember agreeing to, you definitely agreed to." The terms were ambiguous. Ron, beside Hermione, was grinning with the whole of his face. Hermione was crying again, which she would deny later, and which Ron would not mention, because Ron Weasley had his faults but he knew the difference between things worth saying and things worth keeping. The castle behind them was old and layered and genuinely strange, and it had been watching all of this. Harry suspected it had been watching since the first morning, since the staircases had tested Wednesday and found her worth redirecting rather than obstructing. It had the patient intelligence of something that had seen enough to know when something real was happening. The staircases, that afternoon, went wherever you asked them to. Harry and Wednesday stood in the cold noon light until he broke the kiss and looked at her, and she looked back at him, and there was nothing performed in her face. Just the clean, real expression of someone who has arrived somewhere without pretending the journey was easier than it was. "What happens now?" he said. She thought about it with the same seriousness she gave every real question. "The war is still here. Voldemort is recalibrating. There are Order members who don't trust us yet and Ministry personnel we've made enemies of and approximately 11 active Death Eater investigations running in parallel." She paused. "Also Hermione has 3 ideas about the curse documentation that she's going to need to discuss at length, and Pugsley and the twins are building something in the East Wing that will definitely require adult supervision." "All of that," he said. "Yes. And you'll be here for it?" She looked at him. "I told my mother in the first letter that I thought this was going to take longer than a year and that I didn't mind." She paused. I was accurate. He looked at her, the winter-lake gray of her eyes and the cold light, the precision and the stillness and the warm specific realness of her that had been present from the first morning, had always been present, more present than anyone he'd known. Good, he said. Behind them, Gomez had taken Morticia's hand and they were walking back toward the castle entrance, and the afternoon was settling in the way November afternoons settle, gray and calm and certain, and Harry walked beside Wednesday through the frost toward the castle doors, and the castle, which had been paying attention all along, let them in. Inside, Fester was already making soup.